All right, we're live. Welcome to another episode of Monday Night Live. Me and Jonathan got a great guest tonight. Before we get started, we are doing a giveaway, and tonight's giveaway prize is, you want to show them what we got here?
We got the 44 mag lure retriever. And let me tell you guys, this thing is an absolute beast. Weighs 1 pound. It's definitely gonna knock some baits.
It's gonna knock some baits off.
Yeah. So we also got we were gracious enough to receive some star jigs. So we're gonna be sending a few of those out. And our good buddy Gabe here, I believe, reached in his stash.
Yeah, so one of the greatest fishermen in the world, Aaron Martin's, just passed away recently. He had a really long battle with brain cancer. And he is the reason why I started fishing robo worms. So I'm going to send away a pack of robo worms in my favorite secret color in honor of Aaron Martin's memory. And then we'll throw in a little bit of Cumberland Pro product and a little bit of Hawgz Custom Bait product. So pretty big giveaway. You know, this 44 mag is like a $40 value. So it's going to be a nice thing. That would work perfectly with the auto Trieve. Buddy Doug Cheatham, he makes this retractable lure retriever called Auto Trieve. If you haven't checked it out, highly recommend it. It's probably saved me $150 to $200, and I've only had it on my boat for like 4 months.
Right.
Yeah, I hardly ever lose anything. So,
and you don't get your line all tangled up in your reel handles, and
yeah, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, it's convenient. It sits right there on the deck of the boat. It's out of the way.
So pretty good giveaway. You guys that are new to the stream, you don't know how that works. We're gonna reference. I guess I can say it, right?
Yeah, we can say it now.
We always say it.
We're not active yet.
Okay, so sometime during the stream, we're going to reference Sasquatch, and when you hear the word Sasquatch, you're going to guess a number between 1 and 200. And Shawn has already picked the number, and whoever guesses that lucky number, they get the prize package. So there you go. Just keep your ears peeled for that. So on the other end is Shawn Hirst. He's the Fisheries Biologist for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources in Jackson County in the Wren Lake area. Am I saying that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So thanks for coming on. The reason we had you on is, well, you were a great guest last time, and we had several people reach out and say, hey, can we get Shawn back on and talk about fish management and things like that? So before we get going too far, let's just get like some of your background information. Are you from Illinois, or what's a little bit of your back history?
I grew up in the Amish country in Pennsylvania, and grew up fishing in Amish fields and farm ponds. And then we would go to the mountains to hunt, and we'd trout fish up there, fly fish and that type of thing. Went to school at Penn State for my undergraduate, and then I went to Auburn for my master's in Alabama. I worked for the state of Georgia for about 2.5 years, and then moved up to Illinois in the mid 90s, and have been down in this area for probably 25 years now. So I still got a few years left and absolutely love the area.
Are you going to stay here when you retire? Or are you going to move back to Pennsylvania?
I won't move back to Pennsylvania. Now I've got too much hunting and fishing real close to the front door here. So, but I enjoy going back. It's that's one thing I miss. The only thing I don't like about Southern Illinois is we just don't have real good stream fisheries. We just don't have the watersheds and stuff like Southern Missouri with that crystal clear water. And I'm used to fishing trout streams that are crystal clear like that. And it's they're just, with the topography, there's not much we can do. The soil types, and that kind of determines that type of thing. So,
well, you had mentioned before we went live that you came over here and did some stream fishing. Where do you stream fish over here in Missouri?
All of them. I've just started doing it, so I'm kind of learning. The caster's the closest. I went to a volleyball game the other day, and I had to cross the St. Francis, the caster, the 11 point, and the current, and it just killed me to not have a fishing pole and be able to get out and fish. But I'll fish any of them that have smallmouth in them. I try to stick to the smaller water just because you get a lot of kayak and canoe traffic over there. So I just like to wade fish with light gear, 10 to 16 inch fish. or I just have a ball. It's good exercise. It's beautiful water, and it's just fun. And sometimes you can even sight fish them. So I enjoy that. And I bought a kayak during the COVID lockdown. So I got out on a lot of local lakes and not catch anything, even though I know where the best bass lakes are and everything. I don't have any luck whatsoever, but I still enjoy it anyway.
Hey, there's a good one up in Perryville, Missouri, Saline Creek.
I went there, but I went to the Little Saline.
Okay.
Somebody told me about that, and I need to go back over. I went over there and it was flooded. But I need to go back there because that's a little bit closer, because all these places I go, I either cross at Cape or up at Chester. But
And there's
that one
also one in Marble Hill. I believe it's
Is it Hurricane or not?
Crooked and Hurricane are in Marble Hill, Missouri.
I fished Marble Creek, which is a Forest Service. There's some shut-ins there, but I'll have to try that one too.
Yeah, that one, it's hit or miss. The access point is really kind of, it's weird. We had permission for years, and I'm sure we could probably still get it. We put in at the airport in Marble Hill, Missouri.
Yeah, that's where I've been with your brother.
And you got to like cross a gate and parking. It feels like you're parking in somebody's, service yard, and they don't really care. You just cross a gate and walk down to the stream.
And I don't keep a thing. So don't feel bad giving me hot spots, because I don't ever keep a thing.
And that's how we were too. I mean, always, when we stream fish, it was always catch and release.
Mm-hmm. Just don't go there in the certain times of the spring when the baby snakes are out.
Yeah.
Last time I was there was within sight, there was probably 20 to 30 snakes just swimming back and forth across that creek.
That doesn't bother me at all.
Man, I know, but I as long as I can see them, I'm okay. But it was still, I don't know. It was hard to relax. Like when I needed to change a bait or something.
Yeah.
I had my little fanny pack and I'm looking down and
they're
right next to you, swimming all around. And I mean, they're just water snakes, but
yeah. I did see one cottonmouth over there when I was fishing. I think that was in this. I don't know if that was a St. Francis. It was a shut-ins area. Then there's signs there, and I actually did get to see one. That was late in October last year, so that was kind of neat to see. It made me pay attention a little more where I was walking through all the rocks and everything. But
now, do you wet wait, or do you try to go in the spring and the fall too?
Typically it's in the summer.
Okay.
But I'm going to start going early since I'm not keeping anything. I'm not worried about creels or open seasons or anything, because I don't plan on keeping anything. But if I'm not turkey hunting or fishing over here, I'll go over there and try some in the spring.
Doug says the St. Francis River in Roselle access has good smallmouth.
There's a lot of good places, but on some of those places you got to use a kayak, and when you're by yourself, it's hard to launch and go downstream and then come back. And there's some slack water that we've paddled upstream and just floated back to the truck or something. But a lot of just it's fun. I don't deal with the heat. I don't like the heat. And when it's 98 degrees, you can go over there and fish, and it doesn't feel like 98 degrees. And when it's cooler, I'd rather fish over here on my kayak. But I don't last long on that kayak when it's 98 degrees and that sun's beating down on you.
I hear that.
No, it wears you down. You see Phil's on here. What's up, Phil? Got the 44 mag giveaway. If you guys got questions, roll them in here. We're gonna start working on some of these questions. We already got several in here. Let me see where's. Okay, here's one from Jay Beffa Fishing. He says, "Hey Shawn, good to see you back. Is it illegal to place fish habitat in Illinois lakes?"
It is, unless you have permission to do it.
And how would one obtain permission to do it?
Well, for the most part, if you're building artificial stuff, you can get approval from us, but we got to be there to help you put it out. And the reason it's illegal is, one, if there's a place that's a swimming, skiing type place, you got to be careful who's putting what out in shallow water or in deep water that's not far enough below the surface. You've also got to watch a lot of, like, Cedar Lake, Kincade Lake, Wren Lake are potable water supplies, and you just don't want people out there dumping stuff in. We know it goes on all the time, but it's not legal. I've had people call and say, "Hey, I want to build stuff for such and such lake," and I'm like, "If you want to build it, that's fine, but I got to be there to help you put it out, just because we just don't want to, especially like at Wren that's real shallow, or Crab Orchard." You just got to be real careful where you're putting this stuff, because you don't want to tear up anybody's equipment or get anybody hurt. So
For sure.
But we know that goes on all the time because I get phone calls about, hey, where'd you put those trees at Cedar the other day? And I'm like, that wasn't me. So I don't know. I know we know it goes on, but we don't. It's not with our blessing anyway. And
10:30 at night is the best time that I've found to go find somebody to put in brush out in the middle. Of the
I've had people. We used to have a drop off at the. There's a 4-H cooperative extension office in Murfreesboro. And we used to have a Christmas tree drop off there, but everyone would get to the trees before. I'm like, you can keep doing it, but I'm not getting any of the trees because people are getting to them before I can get to them out there. But hopefully they're going in somebody's lake or water for fish habitat anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of trees planted in Cedar. I see them. I think they move them around a lot too, though.
Yeah,
because I've got some old waypoints and I'll check them every once in a while, and there's nothing there. And
they've moved. The initial program we did were these porcupine spheres or porcupine balls, real lightweight things. I won't ever do them again. I think they work great. They'd be great for a private pond, but people move them on me. They're too easy to move because they're like they'll grapple them and move them around, and I know that's going on because people are like, we were out this spot and there's no porcupines left, and I'm like, that doesn't surprise me. But they're in the lake.
I brought one up with a lure retriever. I got my crankbait stuck.
Yeah, they were very, very lightweight. They work. If I had a private pond, I'd use them. But for public lakes, it's probably not politically right to say, but there's a certain knucklehead factor you're dealing with whenever you're dealing with the public. It's a low percentage, but
there you go.
They move stuff on us. And the whole point was, it was funded with tax money, so we wanted people to know where these things were. And so I know there's some still out there, but now we're using heavier duty things like the Shelbyville Cubes that work well, and you're just not going to be able to move those around like you did the porcupine balls. But if you have a private pond, I would highly recommend those. They're a great product.
Have you put any of those Shelbyville Cubes in Cedar?
No, Cedar won't let me put any organic matter in the lake. So even I'm not allowed to put trees in. When we did that Forest Service project, when they bought all the porcupine balls for us, I had to ask 3 times to get permission to put them in. And the third time I said, I'm not asking again. If you're not going to let us do it, we're going to put them in Kincade or another Forest Service lake. And then finally I got permission to put those in. But that was a battle just to get to put those in. Wow. But the problem is buying the money for them. They're about $125 a piece. But I mean, they're going to last forever, and they're big, 4x4, about 5 foot tall type things that I think they produce pretty well anyway. But
what exactly is a Shelbyville Cube? What's it?
It's 1.5 inch PVC built into a square about 5 foot tall, and then there's a 4-inch ag drain pipe kind of snaked all through it. I can send you a picture at some point so you can post it just to show. But if you just Google Shelbyville Cube, it'll come up because they put hundreds of them in Lake Shelbyville.
That was a Boy Scout project, was it not?
Well, there's been quite a few of those. The original thing was Georgia started. It was called a Georgia Cube. Mike Mounts was the fish biologist at Shelbyville. He changed it a little bit and made it taller. And then we've just been using that plan. It's worked real well. I've had an Eagle Scout project over at Rend where we put some in, and then we've built some on our own. I've got material to build 30 more for Rend. I just need to get to that like in January and February. And then when we go to drop Christmas trees, we'll probably drop 30 more of those cubes over at Rend. We've got, I think, at least 2 of them at sites like 1 through 21 on the Kincade fish attractor map. So in addition to the porcupine balls at sites 1 through 21 at Kincade, there's also 2 of these Shelbyville Cubes at least at each site.
We're taking notes.
And when people email me for the maps, I'll send them the map for Lake Murfreesboro, Kincade, Cedar, and Rend. And there's a little bit of a verbiage in the email that explains to them the Cedar ones are all porcupine cubes. The Lake Murfreesboro is all Christmas trees. Rend's a little bit of everything, but it's explained and marked on a map. And then the Kincades are, they're all porcupine balls, but then at sites 1 through 22, there are Shelbyville cubes too. At least.
So do they email you personally or the Department of Natural Resources?
That if you get on ifishillinois.org, there's a link that talks about every single lake in the state. And if there's fish attractor map there, it'll be listed there, and you can sometimes download it from that, or they'll just send an email to me at my email address, and I'll send out the maps that way as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I got all my waypoints from, off of the iFish Illinois website. So,
and the way I do it, I've either put permanent stuff out that's always going to be there, or at Lake Murfreesboro, I rotate sites every 2 or 3 years. So there's always going to be trees at those sites. So once you have the map, you don't need to get an annual map. The sites are the same every single year. So on some of our other, on like the crab orchard ones, we move around to different coves each year, and the maps are labeled by year. But on mine, once you have those coordinates, you don't need to keep getting a map every year. It's not going to change. We might add material to those existing sites, but we're not adding waypoints every year.
Gotcha. You mentioned a while ago that Cedar and I believe Kincade are potable water lakes.
Yes, and Wren Lake is as well.
And Wren. Do they actually draw water out of those lakes?
That's what I'm drinking right here is Cedar Lake water.
Okay.
Yep. And the Conservancy District actually owns Kincade and controls the surface. That's the water plant that's on Water Plant Road that everyone, you're fishing around the water plant when you're out there. It's just off the Paul Ice boat ramp.
Yep.
That building over, that's the water plant that feeds a whole bunch of, Murfreesboro, Ava, a whole bunch of local communities.
Is that their only water supply?
As far as I know, yeah. And
Okay.
then Wren feeds a whole bunch of municipal towns.
Same way with Carbondale. Is Cedar Lake the only water supply?
Cedar Lake is, yes. The old water supply lake is Carbondale City Lake, which is at Evergreen Park.
Mm-hmm.
But Cedar was built in the 70s, and there's a by the Carbondale ramp around the first arm, there's an intake pipe there that takes it to the water treatment plant, and that's the water supply for the city of Carbondale.
Is there any way to get a map of, say, Cedar or Kincade before it was impounded? To show like road beds and, farms?
I don't know of it. I know that a lot of that stuff is on, and I'm not trying to sell them, but the fishing hotspots maps have a lot of some of those old road beds on them, and old bridges that are still there.
I know of one old bridge on Cedar. I don't know.
I know a couple road beds.
Yeah.
I just thought it would be cool to have, a dry land map. Maybe
if you could get I guess a topo map that's dated before the 70s when all these things were built, it would show you a lot of that stuff.
So when was Cedar impounded? Was it
most of our lakes were built in the early 70s?
Okay.
That's when the government funded building all these lakes. It'd be extremely hard and expensive to build a lake now with all the environmental requirements and the cost, and so that's why you don't see a whole lot of lakes being built right now. Big lakes, anyway.
Do you think we'll get a new lake in the future anywhere in the country because of
in the country? I think you can, because you see a lot of water issues out west.
Mm-hmm.
Out west, they have a saying: "Whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over."
Right.
Because they have a lot of water issues out there where I thought I saw where like Lake Mead's about to go dry and they're losing their ability to even do hydroelectric out there because it just keeps dropping and dropping from drought and overuse, and they fight over the Colorado River water all the time in terms of irrigation and that type of thing. Water rights is a big deal when you buy a property out there. You want to buy the water rights, so I could see it happening, but I don't see any in this part of the country anyway.
Stephanie's got a question.
Or I should say in Illinois. I can't
Illinois.
answer for the other states,
Yeah, it takes a lot of, you around here. Let me pull this question back out. We'll get to it in a second. Around here, they had proposed building a pretty large lake in Cape County. And this is probably 20 years ago.
It was longer than that, I think.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe 30 years ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago. It was damming up the Whitewater.
The Whitewater River. They were going to dam up the Whitewater River, but there were so many farms, like old farms, that the landowners just they wouldn't come away from their farms. They wouldn't let the government buy them. I guess they could probably push and get it done, I guess. But anyway, it just kind of went away. And I always thought that would be nice to have a really big lake within 10 miles from my house instead of having to drive an hour and a half. But I also understand that, you got farms, they got history, generation after generation. It's hard to give up that land for a lake.
They've been trying to build, I think it's been called Lake Springfield 2 my entire career. They've been trying to build another one in Marion my entire career. And I don't think any of those are there. There might be files on them now, but I don't think they're close to anything being built. But I can't answer for the city of Marion, but I haven't heard anything about it in years.
Fairly large lake, or
they've gotten to the point in years past where they go on water rations, where you're not supposed to be watering your yard or washing your vehicle until the water gets back up to a certain point. So it's strictly for it's not recreation. They're both they'd be municipal water supply lakes. Springfield is another potable water supply lake, and Marion City Reservoir, I think, is their potable water supply for Marion. But most of these lakes that were built in the 70s, Kincade, Cedar, and Wren, were built for the water supply. That's their. People have to understand too. We get the fish as a bonus, but the conservancy districts control those lakes, and the city of Carbondale and they could actually close them to fishing. I mean, the main purpose of them is for water supply.
Interesting.
It's not about us. It's about the water. Stephanie wants to know, she was wondering, what is the purpose of putting striper in Cedar Lake? How do they affect the bass fishery, and do you think they eat bass?
They were put in as a trophy fishery. They're very hard to find. One of the federal hatcheries in Mammoth Springs, Arkansas, is getting back into producing them. So we've gotten a few stockings in the last couple years. They had a bad year this year. I'm hoping we'll get fish next year. It's a very limited stocking. Those fish get really big, but they're what we call an open water or a pelagic fish, and they're eating shad for the most part. Any predator is going to eat the most abundant fish that's in the lake, and in our case, shad is our main forage base. So they're not, even a big striper doesn't have a real big mouth. If you were to catch, say, a small bass and you're reeling it in, I wouldn't think you'd ever be surprised if a striper came and hit it. But that's when you have a fish on a hook, it looks like a wounded fish, and that sets off any predator is going to come in and eat it. We hear a lot of that at Kincade with the muskies, with people that have a crappie on or a bass. The muskie will come up and strike it. But that lake has too many bass in it. So if they're eating bass, they're not eating enough of them.
Well, I will say I've targeted the stripers over at Cedar a handful of times, and they won't eat a swim bait over about 5 or 6 inches long.
Even one of the pictures I sent Gabe is of, I think it's an 18-pound striper, and they just don't have. They have a big mouth when they're that big, but it's nothing like a largemouth.
Like you said, an 18-pound striper, a 4-pound largemouth has a larger mouth.
Yeah.
Yes. Than a triple, quadruple size striper. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, you'll feel them when I'm fishing for them. You'll feel those big ones down there ticking that swim bait or coming up behind it and hitting it, but they just can't seem to get it. And you drop down one size of swim bait, and it's immediate. You'll catch one.
Well, and to explain, when I say they're an open water fish, they're actually a fish that lives in the ocean and comes back into fresh water. They're like the opposite of salmon, but in the ocean they call them rockfish in some places, but they're the same thing. But when we're shocking in shallow water. I've been shocking Cedar for 25 years, and we've seen 2 stripers in 25 years because they're just not in shallow. They're out in deeper water, and the bass are mainly, especially spring and fall, in close along the edge or in fairly shallow water. So they don't, they overlap some, but you're just, and we just don't put very many in. And when we do stock them, you're talking, originally they were like 1 to 2 inch fish. So you stock 8,000 of those in Cedar with all those bass and crappie. We were getting some survival, otherwise there wouldn't be stripers. But it's not like it's overrun with stripers there. It's a very limited stocking to try to produce a trophy fishery. The only other opportunities for pure stripers in Illinois, there's some in the Ohio River that we stock, and then some in Lake Sancres up by Springfield. They are adding some to Shelbyville, though. I think this year or next year might be the first stocking for them. And I actually caught one about a month ago. We had a good stocking last year. I caught one. A friend of mine that fishes there caught one. These are like 12-inch fish. And then when I was returning some fish from hunting and fishing days, we have an aquarium at that. I don't know if you've ever been to National Hunting and Fishing Days at John A. Logan College. No. We'll have a big display aquarium, like an 18-wheeler, like a 5,000-gallon aquarium. If anyone was at that show, all those bass came from the boat ramp cove at Cedar Lake. We collected a whole bunch of just beautiful bass in about 40 minutes right by the boat ramp. I was returning them after the show, and some guy that was watching me put the bass back in said, I caught 2 of them stripers the other day. So that stocking last year did really well.
I caught quite a few little, probably 8 to 14-inch stripers over there this year.
That was last year's stocking. We got some fingerling fish, meaning 1 to 2 inches, and then they brought us about 700 10 to 14-inch ones.
Okay.
And I'd rather have fewer of the bigger ones because you get better survival. I mean, you stock 15,000 1 to 2 inch ones, you're not going to get 700 that are going to make it.
No, that's food for all the largemouth bass.
So I've always been amazed that some of them make it through with all the bass and the other predators that are in that lake. It's amazing. Another thing we've been doing at Cedar too is we have a hatchery down in McCanda called Little Grassy Fish Hatchery. It's a warm water hatchery. They raise a lot of channel catfish that we stock at various lakes, but they only have rooms for so many, and we try to get them up to 8 to 10 inches so that the bass don't eat them as soon as we throw them in Lake Murfreesboro or wherever we're stocking them. Well, they call some in the spring because they have too many. They can't raise them all up to 8 to 10 inches. They don't have the room. So we've been stocking I think about 10,000 the last 2 years into Cedar, and people are actually catching some of those channel cat. We're stocking them at like 6 to 8 inches, and they're doing well, and people are starting to catch some 2-pound and 3-pound channels out there. So if you like to channel catfish, you might Cedar should be getting better and better here in the next few years.
Good deal.
What's the biggest striper that you've heard of coming out?
Ask the same thing.
Coming out of Cedar.
Mid 20s. Like 26 pounds. Someone caught one the other day that was 20. I didn't see a picture of it, but when I was trying to find a source and continue that stocking, I was telling people we can't find the fish when we sample, so send me some pictures. Or I had the picture I sent to you guys. I would take to sport shows, and people would whip out their phones. Well, that's not even a good one. And then they showed me what they're catching. I'm like, I need some of these pictures to show people in Springfield that they're doing well. Because we don't like to keep stocking fish if we have no idea how they're doing. You don't want to waste the time and the money. But we've tried to set nets there and sit on the nets at night, and it's just like a needle in a haystack. It's just too hard to try to figure out where they're at. But we know people catch them.
Give me a call in the spring, and I'll go take it and find some.
Yeah, I'd love to catch a big one that's going to sport. I'd love catching the 12-inch one because I could brag I caught a striper on my kayak, but that's not kind of what I was a little bit smaller than what I was looking for anyway.
Yeah, I about May, I run into them almost every trip.
Yeah,
There's
a lot of people will,
and right now I can catch them right now at shallow.
A lot of people will troll around shad. They'll find shad balls, I guess is what I call it, on their electronics, and then they're just kind of trolling at that depth, and that's how. And then a lot of the people are just bass fishing, and they get into one.
Yep.
But we had somebody catch a 36-inch one in the spring, but we were all off on different lakes sampling, and he was dragging it around he was in a bass tournament, but caught it and was hoping it was a state record. But we're like, it would have to be almost 42 or 45 inches to be a state record anyway.
What is the state record roughly?
I think it's over right at 30 pounds or something, and it came out of Sandcrest. I would imagine that there's probably one in Cedar, but like I said, there's not many pure striper fishermen that fish for them. It's more bass anglers, but I hear a lot of, people had their line broke by something.
I think
big,
there's a 30-pounder in there.
I
really
would
do.
think. I think there is too.
I
think
think there's multiple, because I'm pretty sure last early summer, late spring, I saw them up by the bluffs. They turned up the water for about 3 minutes on something, and it was the biggest fish that I've ever seen in Cedar Lake.
I've heard that before from people, but like I said, until we see one or there's nothing,
We had all of our electronics on. We were scanning around for them because they were, it's 40, 50 foot out there between the bluff walls by the power lines there. And we were fishing one of the striper spots, trying to catch a big striper. And it was, we heard something. We kind of both turned around and looked, and the water was just boiling and white. And we saw fish porpoising out. It's like, oh Lord, that's something big. So we fired up the motor and kind of ran over there and looked, and we saw a couple big streaks on our graphs, and we dropped some spoons down to try to hook into one. And I looked at my buddy and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, because whatever that was big, and I don't know if I have the gear to catch that.
Yeah, they're strong too.
Yes,
they're
they
very
are
strong.
Yeah, they're a neat fish when you can get into them.
So you got me wanting to go back over there striper fishing now.
Well, talk about how they're kind of a fragile fish, though. I mean, you kind of. I did a video. It's been a couple years ago where I caught one. It was probably mid-20s, and a couple guys that knew about stripers, they kind of got on to me for having that fish out of the water a little bit too long. Are they a little bit more delicate than, say, some of the other bass species?
The problem is they're more of a cold water fish, and they're just like the Kincade muskies. As they get bigger and older, they can handle the heat less and less. So in the summertime, they're going to be in the deepest water that still has oxygen, which at Cedar might be 20 feet. And so if you catch one in the summer, and their size and the way they're going to fight, and the lactic acid that builds up and all that, you bring them from that cold water up to the 98-degree surface water. Even if you turn them loose with all good intentions, they're probably not going to make it. But
yeah. Here's a good question from Gary. He says, tell us the 3 best lakes for double-digit bass.
Are we talking, does that mean 10 pounds or more?
Yeah.
I'm assuming. Okay.
The best chance of catching a double-digit bass, a 10-pounder.
The only ones I've ever seen in Illinois came out of Devil's Kitchen or Ferncliff, which are both stocked with trout. Trout are long, slender, spineless, and when they're raised in the hatchery, they're not overly bright. And so that's how you get these 10-pound fish, is in these trout lakes. Now, the only other one I know of, someone in a bass tournament caught an 11 in crab. But I don't manage crab, but I help on the survey every year and have for the last 20 some odd years, and we never come close to seeing a 10-pound fish. Now, here's the other thing. We're standing up in a boat with a generator running, and the analogy, I probably said this the last time on your show, those fish didn't get big by being dumb. The analogy I get is like they're like a trophy buck. They hear all that commotion and see you standing up with a motor running and a generator. They're just not going to sit there unless they're under some kind of structure and they think they're hidden. So when we go shock a lake, we're not seeing, everyone always thinks we're seeing these 8 to 10 pounders, and we see nice fish, but we don't see the biggest fish a lot of the time. But we have seen 10s in Ferncliff, which is only like a little 20-acre lake, and Devil's Kitchen, and that's stunted with bass. But the few bass that turn probably cannibal and then are big enough where they can eat the other smaller bass, the shad, and those trout get real big. And then for some reason, I don't know how that one got to 11 something in crab, but I would have liked to have seen that one in person. Now, when I worked in the southern states, we'd see them a lot down at like Lake Seminole was one of the lakes I managed, and we'd see them down there every hour. We'd get maybe 1 or 2, but that's just a lot of growing season down there. They just get bigger and they're growing year round. And so, but those would be the 3.
You guys have actually shocked up a 10 in Ferncliff and Devil's Kitchen.
Oh yeah, multiples. Yeah. Now not every year, but that we have gotten more than one. I have a picture. My wife's a biologist too. I have a picture of her with, I think it's from Ferncliff, a 10-pound and a 8 3/4 that they got on the same survey off a fish attractor pile down at Ferncliff.
Wow.
So,
what's the chances of you guys stocking muskie in Devil's Kitchen?
probably 0.
Okay.
One, because they're already stocking trout, and I don't know if the muskies aren't considered native, and that's the refuge is they don't sometimes like that, although the trout aren't really native, but that program's been going on for so long it's allowed to continue. But I shouldn't answer that because Luke Nelson is the biologist there, and I don't know what his feeling is or the refuge feeling on it. But my guess would be it's probably not going to happen. But,
so humans are just going to have to take a bunch of those 12-inch bass out of there. I mean, it's been like that forever.
Yeah. And we have that, like I said, at Cedar. I have trouble getting people to keep those smaller bass. We set the limit to encourage that, and I think I probably mentioned it the last time on your show. We call it Smokey the Bear syndrome. We've pounded catch and release into bass anglers for 30 and 40 years that it's just sacrilegious for them to keep a bass. But what we've tried to do, like I said, if you're down crappie fishing or something at Cedar and you get into 5 little bass that are illegal to keep, please keep them. I even wrote letters to the bass tournament organizers a few years ago and said, hey, I know the tournaments are catch and release and that's awesome, but just tell your anglers when they're out there just for fun, they'd help the lake by keeping some of those little fish, to help thin them out and get them into the protected slot where they just take off once they hit that slot limit.
Here's a question from Stephanie. She says, how does Illinois weather affect bass fishing / metabolism, such as going from short fall temperatures and then straight to winter? So, let's say like cooling water temperatures, like a fish's metabolism, when it's 65-degree water temperature, and then all the way down to, 35-degree. What processes go on in the fish's body, and their feeding habits?
It certainly slows them way down. The one thing, water has a real high specific heat, it's called. It takes a lot of energy. Like you have one cold snap and the water doesn't, on the surface, it might get cold, but a foot down, it probably didn't change even after a week of like real cold temperatures or real hot temperatures. But it slows the fish growth down a lot. And that's one way we can, fish scales and also a floating bone in them called an otolith have growth rings on them. And what that growth ring is on a fish scale and or on that otolith is in the spring when it warms up, they go on a feeding, their blood warms up, they go on a feeding frenzy and they have a growth spurt. And that's what that ring is that we see when we're trying to age fish, either using scales or otoliths. But then in the winter, they slow down. So they're still putting down rings, but you can't even see them. But then when they get that spring pulse, they really put on a bump and really grow fast. So it definitely slows down. And that's why, most people aren't fishing a whole lot in December for warm water fish. You can still catch muskies and walleye and that type of thing. And you can catch fish through the ice, but a lot of times I think you almost have to bump them in the face kind of thing. They're just not as active and they're not going to chase down as much things in the wintertime.
So follow-up question for summertime fishing, hot weather months. How much weight does a fish have to eat to survive?
They'll eat. It's all in they're predatory based on how easy it is to catch them.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people that a big bass is going to lose weight if it's eating little fish. It has to eat bigger fish, but they can go a long time without eating because we'll put those fish in an aquarium at the state fair for like 10 days and they're fine. We have very few losses or anything. They don't lose, they're not emaciated and skinny at the end of the 10-day period. Now I'm sure they would eat if you threw some stuff in the aquarium, but if I had bass in an aquarium when I was in college, and I'd throw 3 or 4 minnows in there. They'd eat 1 or 2 and have 2 more sticking out of their mouth because they couldn't swallow it. They did, but if they're out there and there's shad just everywhere, they're going to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. So it's kind of but it's if they have to chase and chase and chase and lose weight, it's not worth their effort. So it kind of depends on how much food's out there, and the temps. In the summer, they're going to be in the deepest water that still has oxygen, which for a lot of our lakes is like 15 to 20 feet, which isn't real deep for some of these bigger trophy cold water predators like the stripers and the muskies. And that's why a lot of the muskie anglers will stop fishing once it's 80 at the surface over at Kincade.
What causes that thermocline to only settle at 15 feet, 16 feet in the summertime in like Kincade and Cedar?
The Photic Zone is the zone where sunlight finally stops and you can't see it. We measure it with a disc called a Secchi disc that's white on 2 quarters and black on 2 quarters, and we drop it down till you can't see it anymore. That's what we call the Photic Zone. The colder water is denser and the warmer water is less dense. So you've got no sunlight getting down to that deeper water because the sunlight can't get down there, so there's no oxygen, but it's also heavier, so it settles at the bottom. And then all lakes, ponds turn over in the spring and the fall. That's where that water, say in the spring, you start heating up that surface, and you've got all that cold water at the bottom. Eventually that flips, but it's typically gradual, and it doesn't hurt anything. But like late summer, you have that hot water at the surface and cold water at the bottom. As we start getting cooler and cooler, that surface water almost equalizes the temperature of that lower water or the thermocline, and it mixes. And that's what you call the spring turnover and a fall turnover. If you've ever swam in a private pond in the summer, especially if you jumped off something and it's cold, if you go down any depth, it's cold down at your feet, but it's 100 degrees at the surface. And that's that thermocline. That's where there's a big temperature difference and denser, cooler water with no oxygen. So those fish want to get the fish that are temperature thermal specific, like the big predators, they get down there as low as they can go. And that's why when you catch them in the summer, you bring them from whatever the temperature is up to that 90-degree surface, and it's really, really hard on.
So the temperature of the thermocline, let's say a lake like Kincade, a lot of times that thermocline's, it's 20 plus feet deep down there. And let's say the surface temp, we're talking summertime, say the surface temp is 85 degrees. What do you think that thermocline is going to be, the temperature down there at 22? It
would depend on time of year, but I mean, it could be 60 or 70. That's just a guess. I probably have that in a file somewhere. I just haven't. That's a great question, and I can get you the answer after the show, and so you can let the people know on the next broadcast. But it's a lot colder. And,
at least 10 degrees difference, though.
Oh, more than that. Yeah.
Okay.
It's more than that, and that's the reason that denser water goes to the bottom, and then when we get ice, that's lighter water floats to the top. Otherwise, we'd be flooded because all the ice would sink to the bottom, but it gets denser as you get close to freezing, and then at freezing it gets less dense, and that's why ice floats. But and in the summertime, you'll have some problems in some private fish ponds. You'll have a real cold rain with heavy winds. It'll cause a pond turnover like instantaneous, and you can run into a problem because you're mixing a greater volume of unoxygenated cold water with a layer of warm water that doesn't have a lot of oxygen in it. The warm water can't hold as much oxygen as cold water can. The cold water is denser and will hold that gas in its form. And when you start warming it up, it has less oxygen in it. So in the winter, there's more oxygen out there because at the surface than in the summertime. But when you get down below the thermocline, there's no oxygen in that colder water, except 20 foot is where those fish will hang out. Now that they'll chase things down below that, like you might. I'm saying it's 20 feet. You might have somebody come on here and saying he doesn't know what he's talking about. We mark fish at 25 feet. Well, there's a range. And, if there's a current running through somewhere. It might be deeper at that particular spot or something. But in general, we typically see it at like 15 to 20 feet at both Cedar and Kincade. And that's fairly, they're really clear lakes. But that's as far as it'll go. And that's typically why we can't get trout to over summer. Now, Devil's Kitchen's unique. That one will actually overwinter trout. But like most of the places we stock trout, they're put and take. If they're not caught out in the spring, they're going to be dead by the summertime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those fish will go down below, like you said, the thermocline just for a short period and come right back up. Yeah, possibly. I mean, they can go down there for a little bit.
And that, like I said, when I say it's 20 feet, you might be marking fish at 22. Well, I mean, yeah, but it's in general, it's around the 20-foot mark. But it depends on wind and topography, and like I said, where the channel is with what if there's water running through the channel. But that's typically
that thermocline changes throughout the lake. You can go to one end of the lake and it'd be at 16, 17, 18 foot, and you go at the other lake, it's at 14 or 15 foot.
Yeah,
and it can change with sunlight. With the if it's forested, it's a cove that doesn't get any sunlight. It might be not as deeper there. If you get a lot of wind, you get the people water skiing and big wake activity that might help mix it up. One way you break up that stratification on a smaller lake is with the bubble diffuser systems. You'll have those like at Campus Lake. They have this bubble diffuser system. That whole thing is to keep the lake from settling out and dividing like that. And what happens sometimes when those things turn over, that motion kicks up a bunch of organic matter and stuff. So if you go out to your farm pond, the fish are up the surface piping or suffocating, and it smells like rotten eggs, your pond's turned over and it's changed color. It'll be like a brown color for a day or two. But all ponds and lakes turn over in the spring and fall, but typically it's gradual and it doesn't kill the fish.
Yeah, that's a bad thing. That happened to our little 5-acre pond out here. It's been about 10 years ago, but we got a really hard, cold rain, probably 2 or 3 inches, and it flipped, man. We lost a bunch of fish. It was sad. We were trying to save them, but it happened so fast. We didn't really know.
There's nothing you can do. And the worst part about it is you lose your biggest fish.
Yep. That's exactly what happened.
It's because of the gill size to body size ratio. The smaller fish will be fine, but your big fish that you hate to lose, that's what you're going to lose if you have an oxygen depletion. So having like a surface aeration system set up, ready to go, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, we got it. We got in and we jumped our boats in and kind of turned we just kind of did circles around the lake and just try to do something. We couldn't think of what else to do, but we still lost a lot of fish. It was sad. Like you said, most of the fish were the better quality fish in the lake. Ken says, explain the reason, and this is just an opinion, of course, explain the reason a state Fish and Game would put smallmouth regulations at 5 of 18 inches or better per person October 12th through May. So October through May, and then 120 inch or better per day after that. Does that make sense?
On my first reading, that doesn't make sense to me either. Not the question, just the regulation. Put 5 regs or better. I don't have an answer for. I mean, this isn't one of our regs that I'm aware of.
No, he's in a different location, but that doesn't make sense to me either.
At 5-8. Now, sometimes they will have sometimes in like a power plant lake where the fish are growing really fast, you'll set a really high minimum length limit because you want to get at least 1 or 2 spawns off those fish before they're harvested. But these smallmouth at 18 inches, I mean, that's an old fish. That's I didn't know. October to May, I don't know if they're protecting spawners during the spring and then letting you get after it in the wintertime. And I don't know if this is one of those lakes where you're spoiled in Canada where you can catch big smallmouth every other cast, or
Ken's down south. So that'd be my guess. It's got something to do with the spawn. I don't know though. That's interesting. You think it would be like October to maybe March or something.
Yeah, but that seems like a lot of big fish you're allowed to keep, and it would depend if they're trying to do a trophy thing. So from May to October, it's 120 or better per day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure
Interesting.
what they're. I'm not saying it's bad or wrong, but you'd have to ask the agency that's doing that, because they would have to have a reason why they're doing it.
Let's see. Here, Stephanie's got another question. She said, last time you said they wouldn't let you put any bait fish in this year. Do you know yet if there will be more bait fish put in for the spring at Cedar Lake? So, yeah, talk about that a little bit.
What she's referencing is for years we would go up to Baldwin Lake. There's two types of shad. One's called a Gizzard Shad, and that's the one that we have in all our lakes and rivers, and it gets bigger. And then there's another one called Threadfin Shad, and we're on the northern range of Threadfin Shad. If they don't have a warm water source in the winter, they die. So what we would do is go up to Baldwin, which is Power Plant Lake, hot water lake. We would net shad out of it. We had to wait until the receiving lakes like Cedar were warm enough, but we had to get them out of Baldwin before they spawned. So we had like a 2 to 3 week opportunity each spring to try to move fish. We would do that. What we would hope would happen, and it did happen, the fish we moved would spawn. The threadfin shad we would move would spawn once, and then those little ones would actually spawn themselves in the fall. And the result would, you'd have thousands of these like 1, 2, and 3 inch threadfin shad that everything could eat. They'd start struggling in November when it got cold, when all the other fish are putting on the fall feed. And we were hoping, it's just a supplemental feed type thing. The problem is Baldwin Lake is what we call bermed lake. It's not a stream that was dammed. It was a hole that was dug, and it's like a borrow pit. The only way they get water in it is if it rains on that lake, or they pump in water from the Kaskaskia River. That flowing water is what attracted that shad, and we'd have these lift nets to collect the fish. The problem is whenever you are pumping water from a river into a lake, any fish that's in that river is getting in that lake. So now Baldwin has Asian carp in it. The little Asian carp look just like a threadfin shad. And so our department made the decision that they weren't going to let us move them anymore, because they were afraid we might accidentally, when we're moving 4,000 threadfins, have some silver carp in it and move Asian carp to these other lakes. So they made a decision at the Springfield level, they weren't going to let us do it anymore.
Thank you.
So the only fish that we have now are gizzard shad. That's our forage fish. The advantage of the threadfins is they don't really get bigger than 5 inches, and they were just a nice, we can get gizzard shad up to 16 inches, 2 pounds. But it was nice because those threadfins were forage that were available for all different sizes of sport fish. So now the only places we have them, are Newton, Baldwin, and we see them on the river because of some of the power plants along the river.
That Baldwin Lake, I got to fish there this summer. I was on my way to Peabody Kings River management area, that strip pit up there, and when it was closed, they were putting in a new road. They were kind of paving the road, and so I went to Baldwin. There's so much bait in that lake. It blew me away how much bait was in that lake. That's just like everywhere.
That's the threadfin. It has gizzards and threadfin.
Okay.
And when I worked in the southern states, you can't imagine how many shad are in a lake. It's just unbelievable. But like I said, for fear of moving Asian carp to the different inland lakes, they just didn't want us to do it anymore.
Yeah, usually you're trying to find shad on the graph as a fisherman, and it was on the graph all day long at Baldwin. It was just, there was never a shortage of
that lake had a really bad fish kill, I want to say in about 2015, but I've talked to the biologist up there, and he said it's really starting to come back. I wanted to get up there with my kayak in the fall, and I just never made it, but I'm going to get back up there in the spring. You just got to be careful and pay attention to the wind forecast, because that lake, like I said, it being a bermed lake, it sits up, and if there's any wind, you just want to be careful. If you if you don't have a lot of freeboard on your boat, or you're in a kayak or a canoe or something, it can be dangerous up there in the high wind. It's
a real shallow lake too around the bank. That's one thing I noticed. You're 2 casts off the bank and you're in 3 or 4 foot of water in a lot of places, just super shallow.
And it's got some nice, I believe it's got channels, flatheads, and blues in it. If you're interested in catfish, I know they do a lot of catfishing up there for trophy catfish.
So Gary wants to know what's going on with Crab Orchard.
I don't know. I don't manage crab. I'm familiar with it in that at some point, as soon as the work on the dam is done, they'll start holding water again. I don't know how that's progressed. Or I'm sure that's probably on their webpage. They may have something about it. I know that Luke Nelson, the biologist there, he said they were going to try to do some work on some boat ramps there while the water was down, like to do some improvements on some of the boat ramps and that type of thing. That's going to be interesting to see because we can't, we didn't get to sample it this year just because of the water being down. We couldn't get to the sites that we always did. So it'll be curious to see how that lake responds to that with respect to the bass and the crappie. And then another thing that it's going to be hard to tell, but I wonder what the pressure's done to Rend and Kincade, because all the people that couldn't fish crab this year have moved. Obviously, they didn't quit fishing. They must have moved. They went to other lakes, and so it'll be. I don't have any way to really judge it or tell, but I'm sure the harvest and the pressure has been a lot more on Rend and Kincade this past year with crab being down.
Crab and COVID. Yeah.
With COVID, we've saw more people fishing than we ever have, and we've sold more fishing license than we ever have. Or it was increased a lot. I mean, for years, hunting and fishing license sales were going down, and we had an incredible year last year, and for hunting and fishing.
Yep, it was very noticeable at all the lakes. I mean, multiple days at Cedar, multiple days at Kincade where you couldn't find a parking spot.
Yeah, we've had problems with the parking down at the Pomona end at Cedar.
Mm-hmm.
I've called the Forest Service again, and I'm going to try to meet with them to try to do something. But I've kind of been asking for 20 years for that, so I wouldn't hold my breath if that. But I know, I mean, we know it's a problem. We go down there and sample in the spring during the week, and we try to get there almost at daybreak because we have a bigger boat and trailer, and we want to park in a certain spot so that we know we can get out. And even during the week when we leave, I come off there and I look at how these people are parked down there. I'm like, I don't know how that person gets out when he's ready to get out. I don't know how that person can get out. And I know, on the weekends with the tournaments, I know they're parked all along the road out there, and there's just not an easy fix for it. If you look at the topography of the Carbondale end, there's no way to really even expand that boat parking area because it's kind of down in a hole. It'd take an awful lot of dirt work to just add even a few more spots up at that end of the lake. So
right. What are you proposing at Pomona end?
Well, we would just like more parking.
Yeah,
but that's all farce. The ramp itself is like a Pomona City ramp, but the rest of the area is like Forest Service property, and they tend to run into a lot of problems anytime they even want to cut a bad tree down.
Okay.
They get sued, and just, I'm not saying any of it's right or wrong, or, but they have to do an awful lot of work to cut down trees and, for something like that. So,
right.
But I'm going to try to meet with them and say, cause we've gotten complaints, and, but there's just not a whole lot we can do about it. We know it's a problem. It's just one of those things that, I actually went and drove from the entrance to Boat Dock Road up to the Carbondale Road. So when people complain, I'm like, well, it's 10 to 11 miles and a 15-minute drive. You might want to just go to the Carbondale end and park there. You'll have a better chance. But for people from the southern part of Illinois and Missouri, I know that's another, 30-minute drive. Then they want to do.
It's about 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's 15 minutes there, and then you got to come back past where you wanted to be.
Right.
But if you want to fish and get out when you're done, that was another reason years ago. It used to be an unlimited crappie harvest there, and so I put a 25 per day limit on it. One, just with no size limit because we didn't want the crappie to stunt, but we were getting reports of people with just coolers of 400 fish.
Holy cow.
And the other thing is, people would get there and stay all day because they could just catch as many crappie as they wanted. And we were hoping not only would that help the crappie population, it might free up some parking. If you go and 2 people catch their 50 fish, they leave instead of staying there to catch 400. But I mean, it's just such limit. You know, we limit the tournaments there to 20 boats, but it's just not sufficient. But there's just not an easy answer for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Murfreesboro, you manage that area?
Yes, and we had an unbelievable bass sample there in October. We caught in an hour of shocking, we got 162 bass. I want to say 25 of those were over 4 pounds, and the biggest was 6.
Wow.
It was unbelievable. And there was one other boat there, and I think they were crappie fishing. Now, of course, that's during the week, but it's a underrated bass lake. But you got Cedar not too far one way and Kincade not too far another. One thing I'm glad you mentioned it. One of the rules they changed is they got rid of the 10-horse motor limit on state lakes. So at Murfreesboro, you can launch, load, and no wake with your bass boat now.
Okay. I was wondering that last year when we were there. I noticed a handful of boats that were just idling around, and I had made the comment to my dad, that's strange.
Yeah. Normally how they enforced it in the past is they would let you launch and load with a big motor, but then you weren't supposed to use it. But now you can actually go no wake speed on state lakes only. Now that's not Cedar, but it's like Lake Murfreesboro, Pyramid State Park lakes. It's official now that you can use your bigger motors. You just have to go no wake speed on them at just state lakes.
So how was that proposed to make that change from 10 horsepower to no wake?
It was a state law that it was in the lands. It was a lands law. Like DNR is divided in divisions. Where fisheries, there's forestry, there's heritage, there's lands. That was a lands rule at state parks that you could not have a big horsepower motor because they didn't want people skiing on these little. And it typically was most of the lakes were less than 500 acres, so you just couldn't have people out there jet skiing and water skiing and that type of thing. But they just changed it to allow more people to have more access.
Are there any spotted bass in Cedar?
I haven't ever seen one. We got 2 this year. During our Wren survey, we collected about 1,100 bass, and 2 of those were spots. One was a 13 and one was a 15-inch one. And I caught a spot below in the tailwater, just hook and line fishing, but there's spots in the big muddy. But we see very limited spots, but that's the only inland lake that I've seen them on is at Wren. Now, I'm not saying there's none in Cedar, but I mean, we look at probably 800 to 1,000 bass a year for the last 20 years, and I haven't ever seen one in it. But I'd never say never. Now, someone supposedly caught a walleye there in the last 2 weeks.
At Cedar?
And we haven't stocked walleye there in I don't know how many years. So I don't know if that was a fish story or I can't say where that fish could have come from. But and then when I got here, we hadn't stocked it in a long time, and people were catching a few. And the first time I ever set striper nets, we caught 2 males that were 18 inches, and they could have just been like 20 some years old or something. But I hadn't heard of any since this until like 2 weeks ago. Someone said that they caught one down there.
Huh. That's interesting. I've heard of some spotted bass being caught in Cedar. Have you ever caught one? No. I've never caught one either. But any creek that feeds into a lake, there's potential for a spotted bass to be in there.
You had mentioned the crappie limit at Cedar. Is there a crappie limit at Murfreesboro?
No,
I didn't think so.
No, and the bass is 3 per day.
Yep.
There's no length limit or anything on it, and it's just. And the reason it's so good, I think, is it was historically the 10 horsepower limit, and you had Kincade and Cedar right by there. So if you got a big, a bass boat, that's where people went. But boy, it's impressive.
So at Cedar, have you noticed a stunt of growth in some of the larger fish in your surveys?
We haven't. When we do, we don't see a lot of big fish there.
Right.
And big fish, I mean like 6 and 7s.
Mm-hmm.
But the numbers of like 4s and 5s is amazing. And we keep track of body condition. And so if they're in a certain percentile, like relative body condition, and all those big fish are healthy and fat there, but we get complaints that there's not 6 or 7s. And I just think it's because there's so many 4s and 5s.
What would it take to get 6s and 7s in a lake like that?
You'd have to thin out some of those big ones, probably.
Thin out some of the 4 and 5 pounders.
Some of the, well, the other thing that would help is harvest smaller fish,
right?
Because those smaller fish are eating a lot of the bait that would get bigger to support having bigger. Big bass have to eat big bait, and if you've got thousands of the 12-inch bass eating a whole lot of those little gizzard shad, the gizzard shad aren't getting to 2 and 3 years old where they're 4 and 5 inches, and that's what those big bass need to eat are bigger sized bait. So that would help too.
I think Seth and I had the same thoughts here. You're going to do away with the slot at Cedar.
No, the whole point of the slot is to get fish into it.
Right.
The fish are real skinny below that slot limit. Once they get there, they take off. So within a year or two, they're over the 18-inch minimum, and then you can catch them. I know it's not fun for the tournaments because they can only weigh in, one bigger fish each, but it's one of the best bass. The only bass lake that's better than Cedar Lake in Southern Illinois is Newton Lake, and that's a pretty good drive for most of the folks in Southern Illinois.
Is there any talk about increasing that limit from 1 to 2, 1 to 3, anything like that at Cedar Lake?
If you did that, then you'd have to the bass limit per day can't be more than 6. That's the statewide law.
Okay.
So if we did 3 over, then you could only harvest 3 under,
and that would be counterproductive.
When I first got here, it was 2 under and 2 over, and same thing. We would see all these little fish, and when I'd ask anglers, "Hey, did you keep your 2 fish?" They were like, 2 fish isn't worth dirtying a knife over. And we were also seeing, with increased pressure, we were seeing less big fish. So what I decided to do was change it to 1 over in case somebody caught, for the most part, bass fishing's catch and release on most lakes. So I wanted to make sure if you caught a monster fish and you wanted to keep it, you could, but we wanted to thin out the smaller fish. And you just can't have a separate reg for tournaments.
Right.
So it's 5 under and 1 over to try to keep and improve the bass fishing that's there.
Have any tournament organizations asked for special use permits or anything like that at Cedar?
They can't. Well, they can ask, but they're not. The only thing that we change is the high school ones are allowed to. I think it's a 12-inch limit. They're the IHSA bass fishing groups. If it's a youth tournament, the high school tournaments, they can weigh in smaller fish. But other than that, people always ask, why can't we just do that? Well, if our law enforcement's out there and somebody has a bunch of fish in the slot, they'll just say, well, we're in a tournament. Well, they don't have any way to know if you're in a tournament. You'd have to have like a letter dated and I mean, it's
too much
a nightmare. Yeah,
paperwork.
Yeah. And I know, I mean, bass tournaments are awesome and they're a very important thing, but we're managing for people to go out and catch as many big fish as they can. And if I could set it up where they could have, you could have some awesome weigh-ins there if you could keep 5 big fish down there. I mean, if they're biting, I know they're there. And like I said, I go down there and I can't catch them, but I can catch them with electricity. But when I go with hook and line, I don't have any luck at all. But I don't know what I'm doing bass fishing. Like I said,
that's what Doug with Retrieval said. Shawn, do you think after shocking for many years it made you a better fisherman?
No, nope. Nope. I go see all these awesome bass lakes get skunked, and then I go over to Missouri and catch 12-inch smallmouth. That's I mean, because I like action. But to be honest, I'm not one that has 5 tackle boxes with all the latest gear. I grew up fly fishing for trout. I would take a can of night crawlers and go stream fishing and catch suckers, bullheads, smallmouth, anything that would bite. So I just haven't got into the like competitive type bass fishing. I know where the fish are, and I go out and like I said, I just can't. I don't have much luck, but I don't spend enough time doing it either.
Kevin just sent me a picture of the Shelbyville Cube. It's a pretty interesting looking fish attractor. So appreciate that, Kevin. Just checking that out. Let's see. Scroll down through some of these questions here. See anything that pops up to you?
Mm-hmm.
One thing to keep in mind, if you like to fish for hybrids, striped bass hybrids, Nick Abel is the fish biologist for Pyramid State Park, and he just did a survey up at Redhead Lake, which is on the Captain area up there,
Mm-hmm.
and they saw a nice bunch of hybrids between 4 and 8 pounds up there. Now, it's the bad news is it's closed till next March 1. But I will be up there with a kayak next spring trying to catch some hybrids up there.
What's the limit on the hybrids up there?
Ooh, I don't know if it's I'd have to look in the book, but
Right.
I think it's maybe 3 over 17. Because when we have that reg, it's very difficult to tell the difference between a smaller white bass and a hybrid and a pure striped bass, and that's sometimes why we'll have a limit where you can only keep 3 over 17 if there's white bass and hybrids in the same lake, because pretty much if you're catching 17-inch, they're hybrids.
Yeah, it's a big white bass.
Yeah. Well, I had somebody call me, and I hope he's not here on the podcast, but he called me from Wren. He had caught 3. He said, I've got 3 state record white bass. And I'm like, okay, I don't think you do, but let's talk about it. And they were all hybrids at the tailwater at Wren. But he looked up how to ID them, but he was looking at the wrong tooth patch on them. And, but he thought he had 3 state record white bass. I'm like, and he was like, I'm sorry. I'm like, no, that's what I'm here for. You know, you might have had it, you know, you never know.
Now at Cedar, those are pure stripers or those?
Those are pure stripers. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I have got into heated argument. Well, not heated on my end, but heated on other people's end. Some of them will have broken lines.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are so healthy and they're fat that when you see, if you Google striped bass on your magic box, they're typically slender. They don't have a big gut on them. But
right.
if you see that fish I sent you where I'm holding it, it's a big fat fish and it's got some broken lines. Well, I had a gentleman mount one thinking it was almost a state record hybrid. And he sent, he said, look at this, I almost broke it. I'm like, that's a striper. And he said, no, it's not. I was like, sir, I'm telling you, that's a striped bass. They have a few broken lines. And I think he was upset that he spent all that money thinking it was a beautiful fish. It was just an average striper, but it's
like a stretch mark. Is that what you're telling me?
The pure stripers just aren't fat. And they especially the ones you'll see in the rockfish, the ones you see in the ocean, they have just straight black lines and they don't have that big like largemouth bass belly on them. But some of the ones at Cedar are really healthy and they just have a big fat belly and a few broken lines. And like I said, it's hard to tell the difference in them sometimes in the 3, the white, the striper and the striped bass hybrid. And he thought it was a hybrid and it was real. It would be analogous to, I see somebody asked, what's the record for largemouth? It's close to like 15 pounds. So the fish he mounted would have been like catching a 13-pound largemouth. It wasn't a record, but it was an awesome fish. He thought it was a hybrid and it was just shy of the hybrid record. So he's like, well, I'm going to get this. I'm going to spend the money and get this thing mounted. I almost broke the state record. Well, it was a striped bass. It wasn't a hybrid.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
He was mad. And I'm like, you can be mad, sir. I'm not going to argue with you, but it's a striper. That's what it is.
Check this out. John says he has a picture of a 27-pound, 10-ounce striper caught at Cedar Lake. How can I send it to you? You can send it to me through Montgomery Fishing on Facebook. Just send me a private message, and I'll actually send that to Shawn when I get it. That's a rather large fish.
Yeah. And when you guys, I don't know how if you post this or something, you're more than welcome to put my cell phone number and my email address on that, so people have it if they have questions about something. That's what I'm here for, is to try to help answer questions and that type of thing. Yeah, I'd love to see that fish.
I don't know if that's the Illinois state record, but it probably sounds really
13
close.
pounds, 2 ounces, caught in February of 76.
Yeah,
in
it's been a long time.
County. I have a question about the black spots that you see. It's real common. There's a lot of them in Cedar. There's a lot of them in Lake of Egypt, but a largemouth bass with the black pigment variations. What exactly is that?
It's lacking. It's pigment that's lacking. I think it's melanin. It might be called melanistic. It's just pigment that's not colored right. It's not any kind of cancer, disease, anything. And you normally see it in bigger fish. But like I said, the answer to a lot of stuff is if you Google black spots on bass, that explanation will come up and explain it to you. But everybody thinks it's something bad or some kind of contamination or something. And we see it a lot, and we see it on super healthy fish. It's just a pigment thing that they're just got some discoloration to them.
It seems like I see it more in the wintertime. Is that just me, or is there something to warm water versus cold water?
That I don't know, because like I said, we can't shock anything in the wintertime for the most part. Okay. So we usually are seeing stuff spring, summer, and fall. And you might see it more. A lot of times fish in clear lakes have better color. So you're liable to see it where there's more sunlight getting deeper in the water column in a lake versus a muddy lake or something. But I can't guarantee you that either.
Okay. Whitewell Fishing says, what is the deepest depth that electroshocking is effective?
It's typically about, it depends. All the different lakes have different conductivity, but it's typically about 6 to 8 feet. The way you can shock deeper water, it's typically, you can't really do it for bass, but if you're interested in like catfish, you can like almost drag chains or be way down at the bottom with chains or some kind of electrode to weigh it down, and you can get some catfish that way. But the bass and everything, if they're out in the open water, they just swim away from it. They kind of feel it. And that's why if you ever see us sampling, we're always along the shoreline in the spring or fall. And in the summer, we're doing like stream and river work because the fish go deep in the summertime too. And you'll see some fish, but you're just not going to get a good representative sample if you try to do it in the summer or the wintertime.
Are those stripers in Cedar reproducing?
No.
Okay.
No. I think they would need like flowing water to do that type of thing. So I'd never say they just aren't going to reproduce in there.
That's kind of like the Asian carp. Don't Asian carp need flowing water to reproduce?
They do, but they're more of a river fish. So I would never say never, but the fear with them is if they get into Lake Michigan, they can go up into the feeder streams, and they could possibly reproduce there. If some got in Kincade, they could go up, the creeks there and possibly reproduce. So that's, and the other thing is what I always tell people is the critters don't read the books, and they don't know that they're not supposed to reproduce successfully, and they need flowing. They're going to try it. But for the most part,
there might be enough boat traffic in Kincade to make it wash up. I mean,
yeah. Well, if they went way up, Johnson Creek or something, and I'm not sure how long it would have to be rolling or in suspension until they successfully spawn and that type of thing. But
yeah, if there's a way for it to happen, they'll figure it out.
We've been fortunate in Illinois that most of our lakes aren't what we call river run, like you have in Kentucky, where the lakes are basically just the rivers dammed, and all those river fish can get. That's why they have such an Asian carp problem. We have it in the Ohio River and the Mississippi, but all of our inland lakes, with the way the dams are built and the spillways, they just, unless people move them, we're fairly lucky in that our inland lakes haven't been overrun with Asian carp because of that, just the physical barrier of the dams and the spillways.
So have you seen them in our inland lakes?
We've gotten one or two in Carlisle, and one or two in Rend. They both have commercial fishing seasons, and those fish were caught by commercial fishermen, but we're talking like in the last 15 to 20 years, one or two in each lake.
Okay.
And we had a report of one in Crab, but it wasn't a real reliable And no, we've never seen any in there. And as much boat traffic as you would have there with the penchant, especially for the silvers to jump, you would probably get videos or reports if there was any number in any of them. But the problem is the little silvers and the little big heads look just like a shad. And that's why we have that regulation where you can't collect bait from a river and then go fish in a lake, because we're worried people are going to take their Asian carp from the river with their shad and dump them in the lake, either on purpose or by accident. So basically you have to collect your bait at the water body that you're fishing in. That's, you can't go to the river anymore. You're not supposed to go to the river anymore, collect shad to go fishing and in a lake somewhere.
Right.
Mitch Hawthorne has a question. He says he feels like the keeper crappie population on Kincade is on a significant decline the last couple of years. Have you noticed this? And if so, are there any plans of trying to help the population?
Yes, I have noticed it. In 2019, when we sampled it, it was the best crappie sample we ever saw. 2020, they would not let me sample the lake because of COVID. And in 2021, the number of big fish dropped drastically. I attributed it to, one, when the state record fish was caught there, we got a lot more pressure. I had a lot of people, and this is just, I don't have scientific or number proof, but just the number of emails I would get asking for the fish attractor. They'd say, "Hey, Shawn, we're coming to Kincade for the first time. Can we have the fish attractor map?" We had that. Then we had COVID. Law enforcement saw more people fishing on all of our lakes, Kincade included, than they ever have before. 3, the advancements in electronics. Those crappie can't hide anymore. There's no off season. These people, you can target a specific size fish. You can target a specific fish in a school of fish. You can follow that fish around. So with the advancements in that, just the numbers were way down. So what I'm going to do, or what I've proposed, it'll go into effect April 1 of 2022. The crappie reg will be similar to Rend, but it'll be a 15 fish per day, but only 10 of them will be over 10 inches. So at Rend, it's 25 fish a day, only 10 over 10. But at Kincade, it's going to be 15 because Kincade's about a tenth. It's not nearly as big as Rend. So you can still keep, say, 15 9-inch fish. You can keep 15 smaller fish, but any combination, you can't have more than 10 fish over 10 inches at Kincade starting on April 1. The purpose of that is, 1, to protect that fishery, and 2, the nice part of it is, if, say, you have a bumper year class coming through and you're worried about the crappie stunning, you can keep 15 fish of smaller than 10 inches. If you want to keep 15 8-inch fish, you can do that. Like now it's a 9-inch, 25 per day. But when I manage for crappie fishery, bass fishing is basically catch and release. If everyone caught the bass they could legally keep in a lake, they'd wipe it out in a year. But for the most part, like we talked about, the culture of bass fishing is catch and release, and that's what we need it to be. Crappie fishing is harvest. And so what I'm looking for is, I want to allow the maximum amount of harvest, but I want them to be able to catch those fish next year, 2 years down the road, and 5 years down the road. So we're hoping that the reg at Rend has worked great for 20 some years now. And so we're hoping that, and Kincade has, is sort of known as a trophy fishery. We're hoping that kind of protects some of those fish, but somebody fishing there can still keep 15 fish a day. And we've got a lot of other places you can fish if you're really worried about meat fishing type of thing. So I've already gotten nasty grams about it. But like I said, the goal is I want people to be able to catch as many fish as they can and keep them, but I want them to be able to come back next year and catch them again. So, and we sample every single year. If in a couple years they're starting to stack up, stunt, whatever, we can always change that reg again. You don't want to keep big systems, don't change real fast, but we had the combination of the state record fish, the social media that followed that. We had the advent of, the changes in the electronics. The Garmin stuff is it's just amazing what people can go out and target and how specific they can get. And then with COVID, like I said, we've seen more people fit, and they were fishing. It wasn't just Saturday, Sunday. It was every day of the week they were over there. And these lakes just can't there's certain lakes that can produce that. Well, then also we had, with crab closed down, there was probably even more pressure on top of that. And so we're trying to protect the fishery, but still allow the maximum amount of harvest so that you can come back and, we don't want it to be no fish there in 2 or 3 years. So the nice thing about that reg is it protects the bigger fish, and it keeps the lake from stunning, because you can keep smaller fish if that's all you're able to catch. The one thing we've seen at Wren is people complain they can't catch their unders. And I'm like, that's a wonderful problem to have, that there's too many 10-inch fish, But at Wren, I will tell you, we saw a tremendous year class. There's some 5 and 7-inch black and white crappie coming. That by next year will be 8 or 9. The year after that, over the 10-inch limit. So it looks in really good shape. But we'll see how Kincade looks in the next few years. Like I said, April 1, when the new reg goes into effect, it's not like April 2nd. It's going to be awesome. It'll take time, for it to come back. But we're hoping that by limiting a little bit of the harvest, it'll improve the overall catch for next year and in the future anyway.
Well, and you're limited again at the right time, right when they're about to spawn or coming off bed to feed up.
Yeah.
So.
Well, April 1 is when all the new regs go into effect for the following year. I mean, I couldn't make it start tomorrow if I wanted to. That there's a process, a review process, and all this, and it has to get approved at all these different levels. Then it has to make it into the state laws and make it into the book, and just we can do emergency things, but that's real hard to find. I don't think it's, if we had a die off of 90% of the crappie and a fish kill, we could maybe try to do an emergency thing real quick for a year or two. But I'm hoping for the long term that reg will work well. Anytime you change anything, you irritate people. If we didn't change anything, people would be mad because we're not protecting it. So I've taken a lot of heat for it, but I think it's going to help. My goal is to make it better. I'm not trying to make it worse or limit people just for the fun of it. I want it to be better now and in the future.
Well, at the end of the day, we got to be thankful for guys like you out there that are out there protecting our resources, because if not, it would be a free-for-all out there, and we wouldn't have fisheries like they are.
Yeah, if people are willing to take 200 or 300 crappie.
Yeah,
I mean, that's, I just take enough to, have a couple fish fries.
You're not just feeding your family
fries.
at that point. You're feeding the church
feeding,
and the next church's event.
Yeah.
So.
And like I said, that was at that time, that was legal at Cedar. I'm not saying anything bad about somebody that ever did that, but at some point with, like I said, and we're blessed with a lot of lakes here, so you can keep an awful lot of fish, if you need them or you want to. But like I said, we're managing for the future. So I'm hoping, like I said, that helps protect that fishery and keeps the 3 and 4 pounders coming out every once in a while. But that the new electronics, boy, we've told the younger people that have come on with us, you're really gonna have to keep an eye on that, because that's changing fishing. I mean, that doesn't make them bite, but the fact that you can find them and bump them in the face, it's a game changer.
They have nowhere to hide. They can't just go out in deep water and get away. I mean, there's people that can scan them and find them out there, or get the live scope. And
I had a gentleman I know went to Texas, and they had never fished the lake before. And they just, it was unbelievable. They had locals coming like, how did you just do that? And they had this, they had it figured out with the live scope, and they worked with some of the locals there to show them what they were doing wrong with it and how to use it. And I'm like, man, it's amazing how, and, you used to go and people used to fish. They'd sit on a brush pile for an hour and then be like, well, we're not catching big ones here. Well, now they just go look. And if there's no big ones, they don't even fish it. They go to the next brush pile. It's just amazing. And like I said, it doesn't mean they bite, but it really has improved the fishing success, I would think. And that scares us because of, like I said, it's such a harvest heavy fishery. And I want people to keep the surplus. I don't want them dying of old age, but I want some to be there next year when they go back again.
We got to protect the resources for our kids, our grandkids, and their kids. So,
Chris says, has anyone asked about the increase of weeds at Kincade over the last few years? Winter level drops haven't seemed to help. Have you noticed an influx of weeds in Kincade?
Yes, and the reason for that is anywhere sunlight can get to the bottom, you'll have weed growth. They've added in the last few years like 7 or 8 miles, I think, of the shoreline riprap.
Mm-hmm.
Where that shoreline riprap was, it was like soft clay soils. Nothing was growing there. The bank just kept sloughing off. Nothing would grow there. Well, now that all those banks are stabilized, the weeds can grow there because they're not getting washed out because it's knocked down that wind and wave action. When you have all those weeds growing, in a local farm pond with no weeds, you get a green color, and you can only sometimes see your hand about 2 foot down. That's called plankton. That's the base of the food chain. It's microscopic plants. When you have submerged weeds that are rooted, they pull the fertilizer or the phosphorus out of the water. You don't have the plankton blooms. You've got crystal clear water. And when you have crystal clear water, the sunlight can get deeper, and then you can get weed growth even deeper because it's kind of like the snowball effect. The clearer the water, the more sunlight, the more weeds, the clearer the water, the more sunlight. So we're seeing a lot more weed growth there. That's not a bad thing. The winter drawdown was because they were getting a lot of weed fragments clogging up the water intake pipe, which is the whole reason for the lake to be there at the water plant. So they were trying to, instead of like sending a scuba diver down to keep cleaning this thing, they were trying to knock back the weeds. They were trying to come up with some kind of like a cage or something just to block the weed fragments from getting in when they're sucking up the water to purify it, to send it out for all of us to drink. So the winter weed drop down was for that, not so much to get rid of the weeds completely in the lake. You're just not going to get rid of those weeds. So, but yes, we've seen more, and because there's more, the water's clear, more sunlight, and there's more weeds than there's ever been probably there. And the water clarity's better than it's ever been.
Is there any more plan to put more riprap in Cedar?
I would say it's probably dependent on funding.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure they would like to, but it's a lot of times those are federal funds for clean water lakes, water supply lakes. Like you're not going to get that in any run of the mill lake that's not a water supply lake. That's where a lot of that funding comes, and that's why you saw it at Kincade, and then the city of Carbondale saw how well it worked at Kincade, and so then they applied for some grants at Cedar to get it. And but
it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference on water clarity at Cedar. It's really changed things.
Well, if you look, like before that, those were just 5 foot clay banks that just kept sloughing off.
Yep.
Nothing was growing in front of it. Now, if you look where those shoreline stabilization piles are, there's stuff growing behind it and there's stuff growing in front of it. And what that does is there's a foot or two of that sticks out of the water, and that dissipates the energy of that wave, and it keeps it from eating away at the bottom of the bank and sloughing off. And in the end, what it was going to do is it was going to allow a little bit more erosion. That bank would slough off, but then that rock that's sticking out of the water would be like the base of a dam, and behind it would be like on a 45-degree angle, because it would fill in and then it would start vegetating on its own. And it's worked so good that it's even vegetating now with the straight up and down banks still behind it, because it's just knocked down so much of the erosion that was sloughing off. So it was a neat idea that the gentleman came up with that built the barges and started that company.
Well, for the folks that have fished Cedar for a while, there only used to be one island on Cedar Lake, not two.
Yeah, it's amazing, what that's done and how successful it's been.
Yeah, wind and wave action can destroy
and
shorelines.
One of those islands is getting less and less too.
Yeah, the first island's small.
Yeah, it's over the last. Well, there's a couple. Even the one point we have a funny name for, it's gotten smaller and smaller.
Yeah, it has.
And it's all areas that don't have a riprap around them.
Yeah.
So it just shows you how much the waves can take away the shoreline.
Yeah.
Scott's got a really good question about. He says he has a 20-acre lake. He's trying to grow trophy bass. The bass are stunted at 1.7 to 2.7 pounds. Catch rates are 20 keepers per hour. The bass are living on their spawn and some small shad. There are some red-eared sunfish, but bass have pretty much cleared them out. My plan is to harvest 500 pounds, stock a few 5+ pound bass then stock 200 5 to 6 inch bluegill and 350 pounds of gizzard shad. Is this a good approach?
You've got to have shad, and this is a loaded question, so I want to make everybody needs to listen to the whole answer.
Okay.
If you stock shad in a pond, you ruin your bluegill fishing. So, but if your heart's set on trophy bass, the only way you get trophy bass is you don't have a lot of bass and they have way too much to eat. The downside of that is you've got some trophy bass in the pond, but you're throwing your crankbait into the middle of 10,000 shad, bluegill, whatever. I don't know how many of those you're going to catch. A lot of the stuff where they're catching these 10-pound fish in a farm pond down south, there's probably a lot of editing and an awful lot of effort that goes into. I don't think it's as easy as what they portray it to be. But like I said, you've got to have regular bluegill in there. Red ear aren't bad, but they only spawn like once a year. They're not as prolific as a regular bluegill. And you're typically not going to get 10-pound bass on bluegill. So the shad help. But if once the shad are in there, they're in there, you're not going to get rid of them, and you won't ever have good bluegill fishing in the pond. You can have some good red ear, but you'll never have good bluegill fishing.
Okay. He said 2,000 bluegill, not pounds.
The other problem you're going to run into is if you have a bunch of bass in the pond, the bluegill you're going to buy are going to have to be 3 to 5 inches, and that's going to get pricey. And I don't know where you're going to you make sure that wherever you're buying the gizzard shad, it's a trusted source and they're clean and they don't have Asian carp in them. Because most of the time, private hatcheries aren't raising gizzard shad. They're just probably catching them out in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd just be careful on those two fronts. But it just pond should be and people aren't going to want to hear this, but pond fishing should be managed for bluegill. That works best. You just can't. You can have some nice bass and some big bass, but it's hard to get trophy bass in a pond and actually get to keep them because all the other stuff's going to be bad.
And stop putting crappie in ponds.
That's the worst thing you can do.
My pond's that way at my house. I mean, I'll go down there in the spring, and I guarantee I'll catch. I can go sit on my dock with my son and catch 15 to 20, 13, 14-inch crappie in about 25, 30 minutes, which is great because I can take them home and I can eat them.
You'll always find somebody that's had good crappie fishing in a pond and it produces every year, but that's because they probably have a ton of like 10 to 14-inch bass in the pond to help thin them out. But if those crappie ever get one really good spawn off, it's done.
Yep.
And I've seen too many of them where like the crappie stun out at like 6 to 8 inches. You can hold them up to the sun and see their bones. Their eyes are the size of quarters. And you can't catch them out. You got to kill it out and start all over again. But there will be people, and I've seen lakes where they've had some good crappie fishing in them in ponds. But if someone calls and is wanting my advice, if they have crappie, I say keep everyone you've ever catch, whether you're going to eat it or not. Don't ever put another one in because I've just seen too many of them go bad.
That's what I got a buddy of mine, and it's a 7-acre lake, and we do what we can to manage the crappie population, but we try to catch as many as we possibly can each spring and fall and just limit the number. Now this fall we struggled. We didn't catch a lot. So
yeah, well, that's a good, I mean, if they're big enough to eat, you need to keep them anyway.
But sure.
Even like I said, if they're 4 inches, I'd take every one of them you catch and feed the coons or do something with them.
Mm-hmm. Ron wants to know, can you get threadfin from Egypt?
I don't know if he means can I or can someone else, but the answer would be no, because you can't. If you catch threadfin at Egypt, you would have to fish at Egypt with those. You can't legally move those anywhere, either for bait or for your own private pond. It's illegal to move fish now in water from one lake to another. Like you're not even supposed to have water in your live well when you leave a lake.
Mm-hmm. Justin says, so why is Little Grassy allowed to have bigger horsepower boats, but not Cedar? I think Little Grassy is 10 horses as well.
I thought it was too. One difference between whatever happens at Little Grassy, Devil's Kitchen, and Crab Orchard versus Cedar, those are owned by the federal government, the Crab Orchard Refuge. Cedar Lake, the property around it is half Forest Service, half City of Carbondale, but through a management agreement, and because it's the potable water supply, the city of Carbondale controls the surface of that lake. And so that's their rule, the 10 horsepower rule. That's not a DNR rule. That's not a Forest Service rule. That's the city of Carbondale's rule.
Gotcha. Scott's got another question. He says he's talking about tilapia. He says he believes tilapia are not legal to stock in private lakes in Missouri, but are legal in all neighboring states. How would you go about getting this legal? I mean, any thoughts on that?
You'd have to talk to someone in Missouri. The problem with those is they're an invasive as well and would compete with our game fish if they got loose here. So they're approved on a very limited basis for like hydroponic or indoor fish culture type things, but they're not legal to buy or transport or stock in any water in Illinois because they're invasives.
We got Rich on here, hella bass. He said he had to leave Ike's decisionless stream to hang with 10 horse money. So there's a Mike Iaconelli is qualified to fish the Bassmaster Elites, and he's been hyping this stream. He's supposed to announce whether he's going to go to the Elites or not. And apparently he's just it's kind of clickbait. He's just kind of keeping people hanging on just to get people watching the show. He hasn't really announced anything. I was curious about that myself. He's a master at promotion, so I'm not surprised to hear that. So, while we're got a little break here, have you ever seen any kind of Sasquatch activity or anything like that over in Southern Illinois?
I have not. I've heard the story about the big muddy monster that happened. I've been here 25 years, but that happened, I think, back in the 70s. And I'll probably get corrected on this, but the story I got is there was two younger people out parking somewhere and either saw it or heard it or something, and the sheriff was called. And I don't know if there was ever a sighting or anything, but I'm sure if they got a picture of it, it was blurry. that would be my guess anyway. But growing up in Pennsylvania, we've heard the same things, that there's, Bigfoot and mountain lions. Every state there's three stories you hear no matter where you go. There's Bigfoot, there's mountain lions, and a diver went down to check out the dam in the big river and got so scared by the giant catfish, he came right back up and refused to go back down again.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I've heard that in every state I've been in.
Yeah.
So, that's funny. I remember hearing that story from my grandfather on Apple Creek, of all places in Missouri.
Yep.
But yeah, that was that's funny. That
you hear that this lake has the state record in it. It was shocked up or something years ago. It's in there, but we haven't caught it yet.
Yeah. When I was at Auburn, we were the state of Alabama would funnel research through Auburn University, so I got to help on some of that. When I was at Georgia and in Illinois, I've been to places where they see our shock boat, ask what we're doing, and we'll say, "Oh, we're going to go sample the lake." And they're like, "Well, the state shocked up a state record out here last week." I'm like, "No, I didn't." I'm like, I am the state, and we did not shock if we get a state record somewhere, you find out about it. Now, I know that they have gotten a state record like Muskie out of Evergreen, and that's been on Facebook pages. And someone broke, I want to say it was the pumpkin seed record in one of the northern lakes in Illinois. And I think the next week, the biologist did a survey there, and they were holding up 3 pumpkin seeds that beat that state record in that same lake. But in terms of bass, no one has shocked up a state record bass in the state of Illinois that I'm aware of.
Have you, in your career, shocked up a state record bass?
No. The biggest I saw was like in Seminole was maybe 11 pounds.
Okay.
And then the ones at Devil's Kitchen were 10. I did get a 9 out of Carbondale City Lake my first year here, but it had a 1 pound bullhead in it. So it was an 8 pound bass with a 1 pound bullhead tail sticking out of it. But it was a 9. I mean, if you weighed it at a tournament or for the record, it was a 9 pound fish. So that was impressive.
What about Muskie? 2 questions. When you're doing the electro survey and at Kincade, do you shock up Muskie? And then also, what is the biggest Muskie that you heard of coming out of Kincade?
We will shock some, but their body shape being like a bullet like that, most of the fish will come up and they'll float. They'll get stunned and they'll float. Those fish porpoise because they're long and pointy. And so if you don't get them right away, they just go deep and you can't get them. So what we do for the muskies is set trap nets in the spring. The biggest muskie we've gotten in a trap net was 48 inches. We did catch one. I had walleye net set down on the spillway barrier, and I had a 50-inch one caught by the teeth in it, and we got her. Someone caught a 49 last week in Kincade. The problem with Kincade is these big fish we see are in great shape, but as I mentioned earlier, when they get big, they can't take those summer temperatures. And I think at some point, even and why we're not seeing more 48 or even 50-inch fish over there is I think they get to a point they can't take that summer heat and they die, but their body shape is they just sink to the bottom. Because if there was all these dead 55-inch muskies in the summer with as much recreational and fishing activity that happens there, and we would see a picture, get reports on them. I've had calls of people catching, I had a 53 on or something, but no one's ever landed it and got a picture and weighed it and all that type of thing. I had a bass angler say he caught one that was 55 and had a video. And when he sent me the video, his boat must have been 60 foot long because that fish, it was a nice fish, but it wasn't 55 inches long. So, I mean, he didn't land it, but he had video of it coming close to the boat and then broke his line. It's like, sir, that's a beautiful fish, but that's not a 55-inch muskie.
That's a big muskie, man, yeah. 55 inches.
But we'll get mid 40-inch fish in the spring, and they're the biggest, fattest, healthiest fish. It's not like they're skinny and look like they're on their deathbed. They're beautiful, but I just think in the heat of summer, some of them just when they get that old, they can handle those high temps less and less. We even had a study through SIU. We had 10 of the bigger fish had radio tags in them that also had temperature sensors for water temp, so you could tell right where the fish was and how deep it was. And we had some of the guides try to go out and catch them in the summer to see if they just died then within a couple days. And they knew right where the fish were and couldn't catch them. I mean, they'd go out, the radio people would have the wand and they're like, he or she is right there in 10 foot of water, and they'd fish and fish and fish. And they couldn't ever catch one of those big ones to see. And then they were going to release it and then follow it with the radio telemetry and see if it died, and they could never catch any of them. But I would not be surprised if there's not a state record in there. But I think part of the reason is just gets so hot there in the summertime.
We still haven't nobody's guessed the right number. Shawn picked a sneaky number, I guess.
You've been watching it too, so
yeah,
I don't get called out this time.
No.
Ron DeRosa says the mountain lion is real.
We had one hit on a railroad track in Randolph County within the last 10 years or so, and it had deer in its belly, but there's no way genetically to tell where it came from. And I know that there's been one or two in the northern part of the state. I mean, one was shot by an angler or an archery hunter, and I think the police shot one in the Chicago area or something. So young males will go a long way. From other states.
It probably crossed the Bill Emerson Memorial Bridge.
But every person you meet in Southern Illinois has seen them, and there's just not that many of them, or they're really good at not getting hit by cars in this state versus, there's an endangered number of them in Florida, and 20 of them get hit every year on the highway. But yeah, I'm afraid to ever see one here because I've down talk to anyone that's ever seen one here, and I don't know if I'd tell anybody if I saw one or not.
What about bear? You've been seeing an uptick in black bears, or?
I have not. Just the one that came through earlier this spring. I fished the Wren tailwater the day after it had gone through there, and then it made it to Indiana. But they followed that one, through. But I'm surprised that there's not more here because they're in Missouri. The Shawnee Forest could support them. They're in Kentucky, Tennessee. I think it's a matter of time till they head this way. But I've never seen one. And like I said, the only one I've heard of is the one that, everyone was getting pictures of, and they were following it through the state. I think it was earlier this spring.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading a little bit about that in the newspaper. We have, we live in Cape Girardeau County, but Perry County in Missouri has had a little bit of an uptick of black bear. I saw one coming back from Pyramid State Park probably about 2 months ago. I was just coming across Chester into Missouri and in St. Mary's, the kind of that flat bottom down there, and I was coming up the hill, and as I kind of got, I don't know, a couple miles from the bridge, well, probably about 6 or 7 miles from the bridge, came up over the hill there, and there was one standing on the shoulder of the road there. And it took me a minute to realize what I'd saw, but it was much bigger than a dog. It was at night. I got a pretty good look at it as I was driving by, and the next day I called the Missouri Department of Conservation and made a report, and they were excited, but I hadn't heard anything back from them. And apparently there's been a few bear sightings over there in Perry County in the last year or so. So I don't know if it's the same bear, if there's a group of them over there, but they're getting more common for sure.
I know that I think they just shot 10 during the season, but I don't know if that's the southwestern part of Missouri or where you're allowed to actually hunt them at, or where they had success over there.
We had a question come through. The average age of a 12-inch white crappie on rend. So how long does it take to get a 12-inch white crappie on rend?
I would guess 3 to 4.
3 or 4 years.
3 to 4 years. Yep.
Okay.
And a lot of that depends on the forage base, and but the fish that we see over there over that 10-inch limit are real healthy. I mean, we always look at body condition. If they're fat, they're growing well. So I would say 3 or 4.
Okay.
And that's probably the same at most places, except crab, it might be a little bit longer because they're kind of stunted.
Nobody has guessed the number yet. This is the longest it's taken. It's pretty interesting.
You guys were talking about, I'm still looking at this, so but you're talking about the crazy stories. There was and I don't know how true this was, but a guy that worked on a railroad, they found an alligator in Cape County. In the railroad tracks. It's like a 4 or 5 foot alligator.
Had to be a pet or something.
Yeah, that's what I can only imagine.
My wife helped the snake biologist get a caiman out of a pond. I think I can't remember if that was Alexander or Pulaski County, but you'd be amazed at what people have in their homes. And there was one. They named an alligator up in Chicago that they chased for a couple weeks, I think, within the last 3 or 4 years that somebody turned loose.
Mm-hmm.
But
we still have not got a winner. I can't believe it. Nobody's guessed that number. Usually this takes like
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
It's killing me to not give a hint.
I don't know how you give a hint on a number, though.
I have 2 good ones I could give.
Yeah, I would say I got one that he can give you too.
Yep.
You could say it's in between this and this.
No, there's a. I know. I have a feeling I know why. Maybe.
I was going to guess a highway onto one of the boat ramps you can go to.
There you go. There's your clue. There's your hint.
Sorry, guys. We're just scrolling through here. Got some really close ones.
Really close.
Like either the first, the second, or the third number is off.
So I was going to ask you, what are some of the new projects that you're working on, or something that's coming up for 2022 that you guys have been talking about, throwing around?
The main thing I'll be doing is just building those Shelbyville fish attractors and getting those in spring. I didn't get to help because I was working on the river, but I know that Luke Nelson, they've done a whole bunch over at Crab with I don't know how much fish attractor work, but also some planting and some things like that with the water being down. He was able to do some kind of neat stuff over there with that water being down, taking advantage of that water being down.
We got a winner. Thank you, Greg. Jonathan's little finger was about to wear out. He's got
Oh.
strongest little finger in the Midwest.
I was going to say Keller Highway or go up to the Port Ava or the Johnson Creek boat ramp on Kincade. And right when you said you couldn't get a winner, the live clock was at 1:51 and 20 seconds. But
Really?
I didn't want to say anything. I was like, I don't want to ruin that. Them guys will be mad if I can make it too easy on somebody.
Yeah, multiple clues. So Greg, shoot me a message on Gabe Montgomery Fishing or 10 Horse Monty on Facebook or 10 Horse Monty 6 on Instagram, and we'll get that prize package. And the people that won last week, as soon as I get my information from Greg, I will mail all that out at one time. I was trying to get it to where I do a couple at a time instead of just doing the same one or just doing it weekly. So your stuff's going to be out in the next couple of days. As soon as Greg gets his information, we'll bag all that stuff up. And thanks, Greg, he was about to get Corporal Tunnel.
What's Greg holding in his picture? I can't see that on my computer very well. That's just a largemouth.
I can't tell either. It's too small. Looks like a pretty nice fish, though.
Yeah.
What you got there, Greg? Looks like a little like a decent sized largemouth. So we're gonna go for just a little bit more. You got any last minute questions? I mean, Shawn's been out in the woods and Jonathan's been up since 1:30, right?
1:15 this morning.
1:15 duck hunting. So if you got any last minute questions, get them on here. It's been a great stream. Lots of good information. People are still guessing. Jonathan's trying to get down to the bottom of the comments to see if there's anything on there.
Good Lord.
It's a lot of comments.
I'm only at 924.
Okay, I got one more question that I had written down. And it's about that I think you call it filamentous algae. It's that really dark
filamentous algae. Yep.
Filamentous algae. I've noticed that it's on several more points on Cedar the last couple years. How does that spread around a lake?
It grows on the bottom wherever sunlight gets to the bottom, and then it floats up in a mat, and then it's wind blown at that point. At that point, it's in the process of dying, but it takes a while. It'll start kind of turning white or cotton gray, and then a good thunderstorm will knock it out. But there's always more growing. But that's the number one call I get about farm ponds is how to treat filamentous algae, because it's not really good for anything. It's not good for habitat. It doesn't support a whole bunch. It's just messes up fishing, swimming. It doesn't look nice, and it's just kind of a mess.
Yeah, it's horrible to fish through. You can't hardly drag if you're fishing a worm or anything on the bottom.
Yep.
You can't hardly drag it through there. It gets on the hooks of your crankbaits. It's just a pain.
How would you treat it in a farm pond?
You have to use if you're using chemical, you have to use copper, something with copper in it, like copper sulfate is a blue crystal that comes.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of want to treat it while it's actively growing on the bottom on a sunny morning with no wind, because you're pouring water. It's in a foot or two of water. You can spray it right on the mats, but it's a contact chemical. You got to spray it on the stuff. You can also buy liquid forms of the copper, like copper Q-Trine Plus is a liquid form of it that you spray, but you got to spray it right on the mats themselves. But it's like mowing the grass. I mean, it's going to grow again in another couple weeks. A preventative way to treat it is using aqua shade. It's a blue dye that will change kind of the color of your pond, but it does work. But that won't kill anything. It prevents it from growing. So if you get that in March before it starts growing, it works, but you got to get it in before that stuff grows. If it starts growing, you got to knock it back with a copper product and then add that dye if you want to keep it from growing again. The only other way to get rid of it is if you have a pond, if you build the pond right with like a 3-to-1 slope, then sunlight's not going to get much deeper than the shallow edges. You're always going to have some of it. But if you get a real shallow old pond, I mean, it'll just cover the whole pond. Right. And you have to be careful. You can't treat a lot of it in the heat of summer, or you'll you'll have an oxygen depletion with all that plant material decomposing. Grass carp really don't like it. If that's the only thing growing, they might control it, but I never tell people, I guarantee you that grass carp will eat it. That's one of the last things they really want to eat in a pond. But it's mainly chemical or either treating it or preventing it from start going in the first place. But there's more money wasted on aquatic plant treatments than anything with respect to a farm pond, because the plants that you're treating are plant specific. So if you go into your ag supply store and say you got pond weeds, they'll sell you stuff, but it might not be the right stuff. And the copper products are pretty inexpensive, but some of the other stuff's like $100 a gallon. And if you buy that and try to kill algae, it won't kill algae, because it's not made for algae. It doesn't treat algae. And I'm not trying to be negative, but most of the people that are selling those products don't know anything about them. Somebody they'll point you to an aisle and say that stuff kills pond weeds. And then people just grab something and it's not the right chemical. And I don't know why there's a disconnect, but if they go out and spray their gravel driveway or their garden, the weeds come right back. But when they spray their pond, they get mad because they were like, "Why use that?" And the weed came right back. I'm like, "Well, anywhere sunlight can get to the bottom, that's weeds are going to grow, just like in your gravel driveway. It's a never ending process." So,
well, it's just like your yard. You can spray your yard for broad leaves and kill just them and not the grass. And I'm sure there's a chemical for ponds, for lakes, for
just certain type of
to kill certain types of.
Someone may have some pond weeds and need 3 different chemicals to kill those 3 different weeds in their pond. And that's why whenever they call, I want a picture or a sample of it so they don't waste their money and their time.
Well, and they're, like you said, they're going to grow back.
Yeah. Yep.
So I guess when you said the blue chemicals, I guess that's why golf courses do that, to keep that manicured look, to keep all that stuff from growing.
Well, that will shade it. Well, some people like the way it looks.
Right.
But it also prevents that filamentous algae from growing.
Does it do anything to the fish population by adding that blue dye?
No. And another problem you run in with that is it runs maybe $45 a gallon. There's another thing that they sell next to it called pond blue that's $20 a gallon. Well, it's missing an ingredient that helps prevent. I think it's called Yellow 23 or something. What that dye does is it filters out a certain spectrum, a certain wavelength of the photospectrum to keep that stuff from growing. And the pond blue will make your pond a pretty color, but it doesn't prevent the algae. So when I'll talk to someone and say, "Hey, there's dye that works." "Oh, I tried that. It doesn't work." I'm like, if you try Aquashade, it works because I've used it. But if you look on the ingredients, it has something called like Yellow 23 and pond blue doesn't. But everyone looks at, there's 2 pond dyes. This one's $20. I'm going to buy that one. But it's not, and it even on the label says this isn't made to prevent weeds. It's just for aesthetics. They sell another product called Ocean's Blue that's $45 a gallon, the same as Aquashade, but they don't sell that in the stores. They just have it sitting, they have the $40 to $5 one, the 21, and everyone always picks the 21, and it's the wrong stuff. And I don't like to promote one product, but that's the one that I know that works.
How long will that last?
It depends on the watershed of your pond.
Right.
If you've got a stream coming in and going out, it's going to wash out quickly. If you get a big frog strangler rainstorm, you may have to add it. 1 gallon will treat 4 acre feet of water. So I can help people guesstimate the volume of their pond based on the surf. It's basically the surface acreage times the average depth is the amount of acre feet you have. So a way to guesstimate your average depth is 1/2 of your maximum depth. So if you have a 1 acre pond that's 10 foot deep, you have the average depth we'll say is 5. So you have 5 times 1, you have 5 acre feet of water. You're going to need a little over a gallon to do your first treatment. But a 1 acre pond that's 8 foot deep at its deepest part is 4 acre feet of water. That's just a rough ballpark. But if you don't put enough in, it's not going to work either. And then during the summer, you may have to add some. But the nice thing about it is you can add it whenever you want because you're not killing plants. You're not going to have an oxygen depletion in the heat of summer because you're not killing the plants. You're preventing them from growing.
Let's give you 2 more questions here, and then we'll let you go here. Daniel says, how to get rid of a plant called water shield? You ever heard of that?
Water shield, yeah, it kind of looks like a water lily. It has and on the underside, it has this gelatinous sheath. We call it snotweed. But water shield, it being a broadleaf, you can use glyphosate, which is the active ingredient. It's the same thing that's found in Roundup. Roundup's not legal to use in water. So there's different trade names, but rodeo is the aquatic version of Roundup. And there's some other, you have to look at the active ingredient, and you need glyphosate. There's different trade names. And when I say trade names, I'm talking like Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper. But the active ingredient, glyphosate, is what you need. I know that rodeo has glyphosate in it. And these things change all the time. And that's why I always tell people, look at the label and make sure the active ingredient is glyphosate. And that's for treating broadleaf pond weeds. Now, you can technically, you're not allowed to use Roundup in a lake. If you were to say walk along the edge of your lake and tripped and fell and sprayed a little bit in by accident, it's not going to cause a fish kill. But technically, you need to use something that's approved for aquatic use. For these companies to get an aquatic use label, it's millions of dollars of studies to make sure they're not going to kill livestock, fish, pets, people. You can swim, irrigate, and all that. So the aquatic chemicals, you'll get sticker shock when you go to buy a gallon of some of these aquatic chemicals. Like I said, some of them are $100, $150 a gallon.
Holy moly. Wow.
But the main thing in treating any pond weed is you've got to know what that weed is. Because like I said, you can waste you can buy $150 chemical and it's not going to touch filamentous algae.
Well, just be careful walking around your lake with your Roundup.
That's right.
Well, one thing I need to tell him too, all that kind of broadleaf has like a waxy cuticle on it or a sheen. So you want to use some kind of wetting or sticking agent. The farmers call it a surfactant, but what you can use if you're just using it at the house in a little sprayer, like a cap full of 2 of liquid dish detergent, like Dawn or Palmolive, will help that chemical stick to the leaf. Instead, like if you get a water lily or that water shield and pour a cup of water on it, the water just sheens right off and it's dry. You can try that with lotus or anything at one of these lakes that you go to where there's cow lily or anything. So you need something that makes that chemical stick to it, and that's a cheap way to do it without buying a gallon of surfactant that would last you 37 lifetimes. So that's like the old, that's the farmer's almanac way to do it, is just a cap or 2 of Palmolive or Dawn, and that helps that chemical stick to those water plants like that.
That's a good tip. Very good tip. All right, one more question. This is from Seth, and he says, I don't know if you've heard about the new tournament tax that they're trying to implement over in Illinois. Any thoughts on that, if you've heard about that?
Yes, I heard about when people want to have a fish tournament in Illinois, they can start applying November 1 for the following year. I found out about this tax 2 days before that deadline. And what it is, it's if there's a tournament at a state boat ramp, the lands division of IDNR is going to charge you $25 for an activity fee, and then charge you 10% of your the money you're making on that tournament. That has to go to the lands. I know it. They're not going to like the sound of this. It's not a fisheries thing, even though it's affecting fish tournaments. It's a lands division thing, that if you have an activity at a state park, like state boat ramps at Kincade, the Mount Joy ramp and the Paul Ice are state-owned ramps. Johnson Creek isn't. At Cedar, neither one of those are state ramps, so there isn't any fee other than the city fee. Crab Orchard's the same way. It's only affecting the state ramps at state park lakes. Like at Rend, it would be Sailboat Harbor, but not the federal lakes or the federal ramps. So working for DNR, I can't be completely negative. I don't like new fees or anything. I didn't know anything about this, like I said, till 2 days before it. And unfortunately, the Division of Fishery, I wasn't asked about it or given, I wasn't allowed to do an opinion vote, anything like that. So it is what it is. They're not pushing it through. They already did it. It's going to add paperwork and money to the tournament organizers. And it's just an unfortunate thing, but it's the new reality, I guess.
So the 10% tax, is, as far as you know, is that going to be taken off of the total tournament fees, like entry fees, or is it the money?
I think it's the entry fees, but
Okay.
it's since it's not, they'll have to call somebody at like when someone applies for a fish tournament permit, I approve it from the fishery on one of my lakes. I approve it on my end, and then the lands folks have to approve it on their end. But they're not going to approve it now until they get a piece of paper that's like a site activity permit with a $25 fee. And then after the tournament, they have so many days to turn in this other money minus the $25 fee or something. Since it's not a fisheries thing, I don't know what the exact, I don't want to tell you the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Right. So you'll have to check with the lands folks in terms of that. But I will tell you, if you want to have a tournament, don't apply 2 days out because you're never going to get the permit because it's just going, the turnaround's not going, I mean, I can do it instantaneously, but you're not going to be able to get your permit turned in and your check sent to the state park, wherever you're having it and that type of thing.
Okay. Totally understand that.
But I'm shocked that that's the first that came up. When I agreed to do this, I didn't know anything about that fee. And after I agreed to do it, that fee went into effect, and I thought I was going to get yelled at for an hour and a half tonight. So,
I had the question.
I waited till the very end.
I had it on my list. I was waiting for somebody else to ask it.
I completely understand the frustration and the annoyance and everything. And like I said, I know it's passing the buck. We're all DNR, but it's not a fishery. It has nothing to do with fisheries other than they're affecting people that want to have a fish tournament. I know that sounds like government talk, but I mean, it's just a bummer is how I'll leave it, I guess.
It is what it is. I mean, you said it is what it is. It's just one of those things.
Well, just so everybody knows, Shawn didn't get a vote. He's not the one that did this. He's not out to get everybody.
I found out, I think, a day before everyone else found out that was applying for fish tournament permits anyway. So.
Okay. Well,
good deal.
You said you're putting your email. He says, Shawn, you're putting your email or number somewhere. You said, right. Really appreciate you taking the time tonight, and I've learned a lot. Wouldn't mind getting some more information about my lake. So if somebody does want to get a hold of you and send you some information or request information, what's the best way to do that?
Probably email, because when we're out on the water all day, I mean, I have a phone with me, but I don't stop everything to answer every phone call that comes in. I mean, I always return phone calls within a couple of days, but I check my email every day. So the email is one of the best way. I will warn you, if it's a private pond question, you've got to call the biologist that covers your county. That list is in the fish regulations booklet. And another good source is ifishillinois.org. And there's information. It'll show your county fish biologist, phone number, email, and information on all of our surveys on every lake that we do a survey on. And it's updated as we get time to update it. So like if you want to know what we stocked in Lake Murfreesboro, what the survey looked like or something, you can click on Lake Murfreesboro. You can get fish attractor maps for different lakes if there is one. So that's a really good source. But if you, I don't know how to post this stuff on the show, but I mean, if you guys, I think, have my cell phone number and my work email, please post it. And like I said, if it's not me you need to talk to, I'll get you in touch with the biologist that you need to talk to.
Okay, so you don't mind me putting your
No, absolutely not.
Okay,
nope.
I'll leave that in the description box then after the show notes.
That's what I'm here. That's what I'm here for, to help answer questions about public fishing, private lakes, anything I can do.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So we'll do that. So that's it. We'll wrap it up, man. I really appreciate you spending some time with us. It's been good to catch up on things. And
sure. Sorry, I picked a bad number for you.
That was hey, that was the first. Like we said, it usually takes like 30 seconds, but that was a tricky number. So good. Yeah, good luck out in the woods. Good luck out on the water, and we'll try to do this here another 4 or 5 months and see what you've what's been going on.
Most of our spring surveys will be over by the end of May.
Okay.
So I mean, I'll be glad to come back on and before then, but I won't have any new information. But I'll be glad to answer any questions or anything like that.
I'm writing down May 2022, so we'll put that on the schedule.
Well, I guess turkey hunting's in the morning, so that won't affect the evening. So,
Right. All right, man. We will talk to you later. Have a good rest of your week then.
yes, sir. If you
Thanks,
guys need
Shawn.
anything, just call or holler, please.
Okay. Take care.
Yep. We'll see you.
All right. Good stuff, man.
That was a good one.
good stuff.
Always enjoy having Shawn on.
Yeah. That's good stuff. That 151, man. That was tricky.
Yeah,
That 151 was
yeah,
tricky.
that was interesting.
I had a few things I want to talk about really quick before we let you go. Somebody mentioned it at the beginning. Stephanie said, and we talked about the RoboWorm giveaway for
In memory of Aaron Martins.
In memory of Aaron Martins. Thank you. So, big loss. So if you got any extra prayers, send them out to Aaron Martin's family because they need them. They're going through a lot, and all his friends. You know, he was one of those guys that touched a lot of people. Just a true, genuine person, not just a great fisherman, but a great person in general.
Ambassador of the sport.
Ambassador of the sport. And another thing, you know, I was listening to Luke Duncan, and he was talking about the MPFL championship being canceled. I thought that was kind of weird. So
Is there any reason? I haven't watched anything today. I was in the woods all day, so
it seemed to me like it was a financial deal. He talked a little bit about it. You'll have to go back and listen to it.
Yeah.
So he was a little bit kind of perturbed because he had not gotten word from it. It was just dropped on him all of a sudden.
Oh wow.
So I sent a text to Keith Carson today and just let him know that you know, sorry for, you know, that's kind of a bummer because I know he was looking forward to that. And what else did I write down? Rich was on here a while ago from Hella Bass. Rich had a really good, you know, had a pretty decent showing up there at the Bass Nation Championship. He was doing real good on day one and got a little bit tougher on him. So congratulations for Rich for making that, and then for Maddie Wong for winning that. That was a really cool story. I don't know did you get a chance to watch the day 3 weigh? It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. The guy that was leading after day 2 kind of stumbled a little bit, and then Maddie had just been consistent, catching I think like 12 pounds.
Really?
He ended up getting first place.
Oh wow.
It was cool. Apparently he's got a YouTube channel. I'm gonna go check it out sometime. I can't remember the name of it, but seemed like a pretty nice guy, younger guy. And he, you know, what he got was I think he got all his entry fees paid for the Bassmaster Elites. He got a boat and some other goodies. And he was running like a Boats for Pros type boat. Like it's a really old 90 model something.
That's even better.
Hardly any electronics. So he really
You know
legitimately
what? You know what I
needed a
did
boat.
see a while ago that came through on my email?
What's that?
Let me show you this. I may have deleted it. I deleted it.
Well, tell me about it.
Bassmaster Opens registration is now open. So
Okay.
everybody's been asking you on here when you're going to go to the boater side. I mean, that's a perfect opportunity.
I'm thinking BFL.
Oh,
I'm thinking Bassmaster Opens. That's a big.
That's a big jump,
buddy.
isn't
That's
it?
a big jump.
Co-angler BFL to
Well, yeah, that's like $200 versus $1,800 just financially. I'd really have to take off some work.
and if you're going to do it, you might as well go all in and fish all 9 of them.
Lose it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really all we got. Next week we've got Del Coven. He is a bull shows guide, fishes down at bull shows, and the last chance tournament for the Bassmaster or the Bass Pro Shops Open, Bass Pro Shops US Open is on bull shows.
It's the last chance qualifier.
Last chance. Thank you. It's on,
and I'm the one that's been up since 115.
It's on the 17th. Hey man, I'm feeling it too. But anyway, it's on bull shows, so Dell's gonna come on here and kind of give us a little fishing report stuff. So that should be exciting. I'm looking forward to talking to him. And then following week we're supposed to have Fred Rambanis, and as far as I know, it's still going to happen. Haven't heard anything. I'll reach out to him again just to make sure. And we're going to have a special giveaway for that night, so you'll definitely want to tune in. We're going to have the giveaway next week as we do all weeks.
Hey, we appreciate all the shares. If you guys see this on Facebook, Instagram, wherever you guys get all your social at,
Ken says fish the opens.
give us a thumbs up, give us a share. We were talking earlier this past week about potentially some special giveaways coming into the holiday season here, and I think we're gonna set a number of guests that we have on our live stream. So be sure to share because we got some good stuff coming.
Right. Yeah, we're gonna have a kind of an amped up giveaway.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have to reach a certain.
We got to reach a certain number.
So we'll talk about that later on down the road. But yeah, appreciate everybody staying on here tonight. I hope you found it valuable. I did. A lot of good stuff, a lot of good information as always. And that's it. We'll do it again next Monday. And have a good rest of the week. We got to go to bed. We're worn out.
Toast.
So let me wait. Hold on a second. I gotta tell you something real quick. I just remember this.
You're good.
Okay, I got two things. They're both kind of funny. So one is I'm gonna have to talk really soft. I went fishing in Egypt yesterday with my wife, and she fell in the water. I didn't tell you this. we pulled up. We were gonna go eat Mexican. We fished to a certain time, then we had to be off the water so we could go eat Mexican and then come back to get our kids. So we pulled up there at the dock. I grabbed a hold of the dock and I said, come over here and grab it. So she's holding on to it. No problem. It's fine. And I took my life jacket off and I was getting my keys and I turned over and I said, are you okay? And she's like, not really. Well, the boat has kind of started drifting off of the dock and she's holding on to it, but she's kind of stretched out and she can't stop it. And she gets totally horizontal. Her feet are on the inside of the boat and her hands are on the dock.
Were you in your Ranger or were you in your...
No, we were in my aluminum boat, but there was just a little bit of a crosswind. She got totally horizontal.
That takes some core strength, bud.
She's got some serious core strength. She does a lot of yoga and stuff. But anyway, so I didn't know what to do. I grabbed a hold of her feet and her hands just slid off and she just, bam, 60 degree water. So she spun around and got back up in the boat. And we still ate Mexican. She's a trooper. We sat outside, of course. I let her sit on my rain gear. Other thing is that happened last night is our kids come home after we get back from the water debacle and eating Mexican. Our kids had found a rabbit at their grandma's house. It was a little baby rabbit. So we adopted a baby rabbit for the night, which was fine. Our dog was going kind of nuts, but they made friends. We had it in a little tub, like just a little rubber, little storage tub. We had blankets down there and all the stuff. About 4 o'clock this morning, 4 a.m., our daughter comes in her room and she said the rabbit got out and she could not find it. It had jumped out of that tub and nobody could find it. So finally, Ella gets under her bed and this little bunny is super, super cute. She named it Coco. It's the cutest little bunny. But it had crawled underneath the bed and she found it, put it back in the tub, and she's like, what am I going to do to keep it from jumping out? I'm like, I don't know, Ella. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Right. Just throw a towel over the top. So she put a blanket over there. Anyway, we get up in the morning and there's little rabbit pellets. Like it had basically pooped all over the house, left little piles all over the house.
Did it get out again or was that from?
No, once we put the blanket over the top, it was good. So that's why I'm tired and you're tired and we got to go. We really enjoyed it. So you guys have a really good evening. We will see you